Chapter 153. The person who came was a youth about 16 or 17 years old. He looked to be about the same age as EXN, but his temperament was completely different from the cheerful and lively EXN. This youth's face was fair without any facial hair. His appearance could be considered handsome, but for some reason, there was a rather feminine aura between his brows. Even the way he walked had a slightly swaying appearance of a girl. When Lu Chen saw this, he was momentarily stunned, and the words that he originally wanted to say were stuck in his throat. The youth also saw Lu Chen suddenly standing in front of the mountain path, blocking the way. He frowned his slender eyebrows, stopped walking and said to Lu Chen, "Who are you?" It would have been better if he hadn't spoken, but the moment he spoke, Lu Chen immediately felt goosebumps all over his body. As it turned out, this youth's voice was actually very feminine. It didn't have the rough tone of an ordinary man, and sounded almost like a girl. "I am Lu Chen. Young master, are you also here to find Su Qingjun Shijisu?" Lu Chen quickly controlled his emotions, coughed, and then opened his mouth to ask. "Yes." The youth suddenly frowned, stared at Lu Chen and said, "What did you mean by the word, also, just now? Could it be that someone else came before me?" "Yes, there was already a young master of the Su family called Su Wen who came before us," Lu Chen said. "Su Wen?" The youth snorted as if there was some disdain on his face. He then walked forward and at the same time said, "I am also a member of the Su family called Su Tong, Sister Jun's 8th brother. Step aside, I have something to see her about." Su Tong took 2 steps forward and suddenly stopped, because he found that Lu Chen was still blocking the mountain path, and had no intention of letting him pass. Su Tong's face darkened, and a trace of anger appeared on his face. However, his face was really feminine and handsome like a girl's, and this anger made him look like a girl's coquettish pout, causing Lu Chen's scalp to go numb. "What are you doing? Why are you stopping me?" Lu Chen forced a smile and forced himself to explain Su Qingjuan's situation to him. In the end he even persuaded him patiently, "Young Master Su, you and Shiji Su are brother and sister. I believe you can understand her current situation. She needs to take the eagle fruit for a few days. Why don't you go back first? As long as this period is over she—" "No." Su Tong suddenly opened his mouth and interrupted Lu Chen's words straightforwardly and even somewhat rudely. Lu Chen was stunned. "Why is that?" Su Tong looked as if he was clenching his teeth, but he didn't say what the reason was. He only said loudly again, "I have an urgent matter, I want to see Sister June now. She is currently cultivating in the cave, so it is indeed inconvenient for her to come out." Lu Chen said earnestly, "Why don't you tell me what you need? Once she's free I'll tell her immediately. I won't hold you up. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care." Su Tong suddenly shouted loudly. At the same time, his eyes suddenly became misty, looking as if he was about to cry. Lu Chen was dumbstruck and momentarily forgot what he should say. He thought to himself that the Su family was indeed a strange family. Could it be that the luck and benefits of the entire family had all been taken by Su Qingjun, and the rest were all people that couldn't be looked at directly? No wonder that old man looked as if he hated the Su family to the bone. It seemed that he had been viciously disgusted in the past. But even with such a family, Su Qingjun still patiently took care of them. Lu Chen suddenly felt that his impression of Su Qingjun had undergone an earth-shattering change. This wasn't a cold and arrogant temperament at all. This was clearly the heart of a bodhisattva. Because he felt that his 3 views and knowledge had been greatly stimulated, Lu Chen was in a daze. Carelessly, Su Tong ran past him and dashed towards the entrance of the cave. Lu Chen was shocked and quickly chased after him. Just as he wanted to catch him, he found that Su Tong was running gracefully, swaying like a lotus. For a moment he couldn't catch him no matter how hard he tried. He could only smile bitterly and go around in a circle, stopping him at the entrance of the cave. He persuaded, "Miss Su, don't be like this." "What?" Su Tong suddenly raised his eyebrows and stared at Lu Chen, shouting, "What did you call me?" Lu Chen was shocked and immediately came to his senses. He immediately said, "Young Master Su. Young Master Su, I misspoke. Please don't be angry." Su Tong stared at him hatefully, his face full of anger. Lu Chen felt that this was a thorny problem. He thought that this Su Tong was more troublesome than all the people from the Su family added together. At that moment he had no choice but to let out a long sigh. His expression bleak, he said, Forget it. In any case I have tried my best. Even if Shiji Su is punished because of this, I don't think she can blame me." As he said that, he shook his head and took 2 steps to the side, giving way to the cave's stone door. Su Tong snorted and stretched out his hand to slap the stone door. But just as his palm was about to land on the door, he suddenly retracted his hand. He frowned and looked at Lu Qin. His face revealed a suspicious expression. He said, "Tell me clearly. Why would Sister June be punished?" Lu Qin nodded and said, "Shiji Su is a heavenly genius. At such a young age she has already surpassed all others in cultivation. The speed at which she advanced to the Jindan realm is unprecedented. You should be clear about this, right?" Su Tong's face revealed a proud expression. He said, "Of course. Our Sister June was born this outstanding." Lu Qin's eyes flashed. From the corner of his eyes, he suddenly saw a gray-haired old man at the edge of the spiritual field that was covered by trees and rocks. He was looking at them with a smile on his face. He chuckled and kept drinking. His expression didn't change. He said, "However, although Shiji Su's talent is outstanding, she is also unusually diligent in her daily cultivation. It can even be considered as harsh. Let's not talk about other things. After advancing to the Jindan realm, she has to think of ways to eliminate the slight signs of instability in her aura. Who can understand the hardships in between?" Su Tong's expression darkened. He seemed to have thought of something and snorted coldly. Lu Qin sighed and said, "Actually, speaking of this, I think you should have an idea in your heart. The reason why Shiji Su is so diligent in her cultivation is actually because of the strict teachings of her master, Masato Kihara. She is meticulous and strives for perfection. That's why she has today's achievements. If you disturb her now, you will be violating Masato Kihara's order for her to meditate and cultivate. You can't guarantee that she will be reprimanded and punished later. How can you bear to do that?" Su Tong's expression changed. He suddenly broke out into curses. He said angrily, "That old man Mu Yuan. He's old and frivolous. He's so daring in his lust that he keeps surrounding my Sister June all day long." In the distance, the gray-haired old man's body trembled. He spat out a mouthful of wine that was in his mouth. Outside the Immortal's cave, Lu Qin was also stunned. He waved his hands twice as if he wanted to stop Su Tong from continuing to speak. Unexpectedly, Su Tong, who was in a fit of anger, ignored him and continued to curse loudly. "Everyone in Kunwa City knows that my Sister June has been gifted since she was a child. She was born with an immortal omen and was destined to become a person with great achievements in the future. At that time, many perfected sovereigns and spiritual masters in the Kunlun party took a fancy to our Sister June. It was this shameless old man who was shameless and acted crafty. He secretly pretended to be a pitiful and lonely old man and begged Sister June while weeping bitterly. He made her soft-hearted for a moment and mistakenly entered this old man's tutelage." Lu Qin sucked in a breath of cold air. He looked at Su Tong, who looked like a woman but had a much more explosive temper than most men. For a moment he had a whole new level of respect for him. He really felt that the saying "you can't judge a book by its cover" was simply a famous saying. At the same time he secretly glanced at the thatched hut. He saw that on the ridge of the field, the gray-haired old man was holding a wine urn. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling. The light around him was faintly distorted, and there was actually the power of thunder and lightning. Lu Qin calmly took 2 steps back, distancing himself from Su Tong, who was spitting saliva everywhere. Then he looked at him with a gaze full of respect, as if he was looking at a dead man. He coughed and laughed dryly. "This can't really be so exaggerated, right? I say, why don't you go back first and we'll talk about it another day?" Su Tong stared at the stone door of the Immortal's cave in front of him. A trace of grief and indignation suddenly flashed across his face. After a moment, 2 lines of tears flowed from his eyes. Lu Qin was speechless as he watched from the side. When he was about to ask, he suddenly saw Su Tong throw himself in front of the door. He slapped the stone door and cried, Sister June, it's all because the men of the Su family are incompetent. If any of the men of the Su family had a promising future, how could they let you suffer such pain and suffering? If you weren't in Taiji but in Kuanji, how could your achievements be limited to a mere Jin Dan? How could your status in the sect be limited to this? Sister June, we've let you down. We've harmed you. Lu Qin rolled his eyes and looked at Su Tong, crying for a while. It seemed that Su Tong was completely immersed in his own world and could no longer pay attention to the outside world. On the other side, the gray-haired old man also looked stunned. He then shook his head vigorously as if he had seen a ghost. Lu Qin waited for a while, then walked up to Su Tong and pulled him up. He patiently persuaded him and finally managed to persuade him. Of course, this was mainly due to what he said. Su Qingjun had already sacrificed so much. It was better not to implicate and hurt her anymore. Just let her have a little peace in the Immortal's cave for a while. It could also be considered as a little heart-wrenching rest for this painful life. Hearing this, Su Tong burst into tears again. Only then did he walk away, looking back 3 times. Lu Qin sent this extremely eccentric young man away. After a while he slowly walked back. Looking at the empty Fian platform, he could not help but let out a long sigh. He felt that dealing with him was more tiring than assassinating people who were 10 times more powerful than him in the past. Lu Qin shook his head and slowly walked to the side of the straw hut. The gray-haired old man was standing on the ridge of the field, looking at him coldly with a gaze as sharp as a knife. Lu Qin smiled bitterly and said, "Senior, we are all reasonable people. Can you listen to what I have to say?" "No." The gray-haired old man shouted, and with a pa sound, the large wine urn under his ribs directly shattered into countless pieces, falling onto the soil of the field embankment with a hualala sound. The Fian platform was instantly silent. Chapter 154. Lu Qin glanced at the overbearing gray-haired old man, and then glanced at the wine jar that had shattered into countless small pieces on the ground. After that he sighed and said, "Senior, you're being unreasonable." The gray-haired old man said angrily, "If you have something to say it quickly." Lu Qin immediately sped up and said, "First, you told me before that as long as I can get rid of that Su Tong, you will give me a reward and not a punishment. I can't just go back on my word. Second, those curses just now were all cursed by that stupid Su family boy. I didn't say anything. You can't vent your anger on me, right?" He looked at the gray-haired old man and said with a smile, "Senior, do you think what I said is right?" The gray-haired old man looked at him for a long time. The anger on his face suddenly eased, and there was a bit of admiration on his face. He said with a smile, "You kid, you are a bit interesting. From what you said, it seems like you have already guessed my identity." Lu Qin said, "Yes, I guessed a little before, but I didn't dare to confirm it, but it should be more or less right now." As he said this, he bowed and said seriously, "I pay my respects to Masato Kihara." Masato Kihara was Su Qingjuan's Shizhuan. He was also a Yuanying Jinren with extremely high cultivation in the Kunlun party. At the same time he had another more sensitive identity, that was the leader of the Cheji branch of the Kunlun party. His position in the Kunlun party was extremely high. The gray-haired old man clapped his hands and said, "Interesting. Tell me, how did you know my identity?" Lu Qin said with a respectful expression, "Senior is fond of fine wine. This disciple has heard rumors before." The gray-haired old man nodded but then said, "But just based on this, I'm afraid it's not justifiable." Lu Qin said, "There is another matter here and now. Su Qingjun Shiji Su is now one of the most outstanding geniuses in the sect. Everyone in the sect knows how much you value her. This is an important moment of cultivation. Logically speaking, the other spiritual masters should avoid arousing suspicion and shouldn't appear here. Only you, Senior, can avoid suspicion. Comparing the two, I think Senpai is most likely Masato Kihara." The gray-haired old man stared at Lu Qin for a moment, before he finally nodded his head and said, "Well said. Such quick thinking. It's a pity that you don't have a good aptitude and can only be a service disciple." "What a pity." Lu Qin smiled and said, "It's all natural. There's nothing we can do about it." The eccentric Yuanying Jinren, who was said to have shouldered all the dangers by himself, did not seem to have any unreasonable actions. He turned around and flicked his sleeve, and the broken pieces of the wine urns on the ground flew up and gathered into a pile. He sat down again on the ridge of the field and beckoned to Lu Qin, saying, "Come and sit." Lu Qin walked over and sat down beside him. Masato Kihara looked at him. The admiration in her eyes increased, but there was even more regret. Of course, this kind of gaze and emotion only flashed past. He smiled and said, "When I was angry just now, why didn't you show any fear? How did you see that I'm not angry?" Lu Qin paused, then pointed to the pile of broken pieces and said, "That wine urn is broken, but the wine inside did not spill out. You crushed it after drinking all the wine, right?" Masato Kihara laughed and nodded repeatedly. "June girl really has good taste. She actually chose such a quick-witted person like you to come over." Lu Qin smiled and said, "Senior, you flatter me. You should stay here for a long time. If there's anything, help to fend off those Su family people so that June girl can also relax. Otherwise, it will be too hard for her to be troubled by these trivial matters all day long." Lu Qin hesitated for a moment, then said, "Thank you, Senior, for your kind intentions, but this matter will most likely need to be decided by Shiji Su herself. After all, Flying Goose Terrace is her place of quiet cultivation. If she herself does not like outsiders here, then no one can do anything about it. Masato Kihara nodded slowly. Although he was the Shirzuen, it seemed that he really doted on his talented disciple, Su Qingjun. He would not casually come over and tell her what to do. Lu Qin suddenly smiled and said, "Actually, with your power as a Zhenren, it won't take much effort to drive away those strange disciples of the Su family. Why do you need to go through so much trouble?" Masato Kihara rolled his eyes and snorted coldly, "Nonsense. How can I not know about this matter? But isn't this because I have misgivings? June girl has a kind heart. She has always felt that she is born of the Su family and has received the full support of the Su family. So, she has always wanted to take care of that big family. So all these years, those good-for-nothing fellows have all pestered her for countless trivial matters, big and small." Lu Qin pondered for a moment and said, "Although this is reasonable, but in this disciple's opinion, it is necessary to be more respectful and filial to the elders who are valued by the family. As for the many troublesome youngsters below, it is not a problem to help out when there is an emergency. But if there is an excessive request, it is also possible to decline." Masato Kihara slapped his thigh and said loudly, "Isn't this the reason? Unfortunately, I have spoken to June girl a few times. She has verbally agreed, but when she cries and begs those good-for-nothings in the family, her heart has repeatedly softened. I also can't do anything about her." Lu Qin smiled and didn't answer. The latter part of the conversation was indeed not easy to answer. Masato Kihara could say this but he couldn't. Moreover, looking at Masato Kihara's appearance, his heart ached for Su Qingjun. Perhaps it was sincere, but he didn't care about those Su family's children because of Su Qingjun. Taiji was in such an awkward and declining situation, and the Su family was second to none in Kunwu City. Because of Su Qingjun, he would naturally stand on Taiji's side. He could also be regarded as Taiji's financial backer. Although Masato Kihara's cultivation was 100 times higher than those good-for-nothings in the Su family, this face wasn't that easy to overturn. People often said that cultivators were like immortals, as if those who succeeded in cultivation were living the life of immortals. In fact, how could it be so easy and beautiful? There were always many helplessness and many fetters that couldn't be removed. No matter how big the world was, there was no exception. For a while Masato Kihara and Lu Qin didn't speak. The spiritual field was quiet. The mountain breeze blew gently. Looking from behind, the two of them, one old and one young, sat side by side on the ridge of the field. They looked very harmonious, and it was impossible to see that there was actually a world of difference in status between the two. After sitting for a while, Masato Kihara suddenly shook her head and sighed softly. She stood up and patted her buttocks, saying, "Forget it. I don't care about these dog skin and stove matters anymore. Go and call Qingjun out. I'll see her and give her a few words of advice before I leave." Lu Qin was startled and looked at Masato Kihara in astonishment. After waiting for a moment, Masato Kihara suddenly found that Lu Qin was still standing in place. She couldn't help but frown, saying, "Why aren't you going?" For a moment, Lu Qin only felt a headache. If those people from the Su family ran over to pester Su Qingjun, he could still block them. But this person in front of him was Su Qingjun's master and the famous Yuanying spiritual master. How could he block her? After a moment of daze, Lu Qin smiled bitterly, saying, "This? Senior sister Qingjun, she's meditating. Nonsense." As expected, Masato Kihara scolded back without thinking. Looking at him with a contemptuous expression, she said, "I'm her master. How can I not know her situation?" These words can only deceive the Su family's inexperienced trash. It's just eating some eagle fruit, why meditate? Just eat and sleep every day. When the time comes, just take the fruit and swallow it. There's no need for so many things. Go and call her out." Lu Qin smiled awkwardly, groaning inwardly. In this instant, thousands of ideas flashed through his mind, but none of them could solve the current predicament and send the old man away. He had no choice but to turn around and slowly walk toward the cave residence's stone door. He shook his head inwardly and smiled wryly as he thought, "Su Qingjun, you're just unlucky. Who knew that even your master would come looking for trouble with you today? This is really unstoppable." Behind him, Masato Kihara was a little anxious. Frowning, she said, "Hey kid, weren't you so smart and capable just now? Why are you walking so slowly? Is something wrong?" Lu Qin was startled. These Yuanying geezers were all as cunning as ghosts, able to sense the slightest thing wrong. He didn't dare to delay any longer, but he still couldn't think of a solution as he walked to the cave residence's door. Standing in front of the stone door, he subconsciously reached into his bosom. The yellow stone talisman was still lying there quietly. However, Luchin quickly put his hand down and coughed. Imitating the Su family disciples, he began banging on the stone door with force, calling out in a clear voice, Shijisu, open the door, your master is here." Unsurprisingly, the stone door stood tall and unresponsive. Luchin looked back and saw that Masato Kihara was also walking over with a frown. He coughed once and smiled at Masato Kihara. Then, pa, he continuously banged on the stone door. The movement was not small and the sound was very loud, but the stone door did not open. After a while, Luchin somewhat helplessly turned his head to look at Masato Kihara and said, "Senior, you see, perhaps Shijisu is really meditating at the moment. Why don't we not disturb her?" "Meditating my ass." Spiritual Master Muyuan seemed to speak very naturally in front of an insignificant servant disciple like Luchin. He casually scolded him, but then a suspicious look appeared on his face. He looked at the stone door and muttered to himself in a low voice, "But, could it be that this girl's old habit is acting up and she's sleeping in again?" "Sleep in what?" Luchin didn't hear clearly and asked, "What did you say, who likes to sleep?" "Nothing like that," Masato Kihara flatly said. Then his eyes turned and he waved his hand saying, "Get out of the way, I'll go in and take a look myself." "Senior, this isn't too good, right?" Chapter 155. Masato Kihara rolled his eyes and said, "What's not very good? This old man is her Shifu. I'm concerned about her going in to take a look. What's there to be surprised about?" Luchin sternly said, "Senior, although your seniority is high and your cultivation is high, but no matter what, the one living here is an unmarried young lady. If you suddenly barge in like this, in case..." He did not continue, only looked at Masato Kihara with a meaningful look. Masato Kihara angrily said, "In case what? You tell this old man clearly." Luchin said, "In case after you go in you see something you shouldn't see, to say something disrespectful. Shijisu lives alone in the cave, usually she wears, it's normal for her to wear something simple, but if you see it like this I'm afraid it's not good for both you and her." Masato Kihara was furious, said, "Stinky brat, you dare to talk to me like this?" Luchin coughed and said, "Senior, both of us are reasonable people, although your cultivation is 100 times higher than mine, but the reason is indeed so." After saying that he suddenly lowered his voice, leaned close to Masato Kihara and said in a low voice, "Don't forget, just now that Su family's boy Su Tong said those shameful words, every word hit the heart. People like us who understand naturally snorted and did not believe it, but in case you go in, some words won't be clear." Masato Kihara was startled, subconsciously took a step back and said, "That's right?" Luchin spread out his hands and said, "Isn't that so?" The more Masato Kihara thought, the more he felt it was reasonable, nodded repeatedly and said, that's right, you're right, this old man almost made a big mistake." After saying that, he looked at Luchin, his eyes revealed a bit of joy and said, "Little guy is not bad, you would rather contradict this old man and still want to explain the reason, you really have strength of character." Luchin spat in his heart, thought, "Who wants this bullshit strength of character? If I can leave, this old man would have left long ago." But on the surface he still laughed dryly and took a step back, thinking that since it has come to this old man should leave first no matter what. Who knew that although Masato Kihara seemed to have dispelled the idea of breaking into the cave, he had no intention of leaving Fian platform. Instead, after a moment of contemplation, he suddenly frowned as if he had thought of something. Luchin looked at his expression, his heart thumped again. Facing such a nascent soul realm old man was not the same as dealing with the trash disciples of the Su family. It was really hard as hell. As expected, Master Muyuan thought for a moment, then looked at Luchin and said, "That's not right." Luchin smiled bitterly and said, "What is not right?" Masato Kihara said, "You have been knocking on the stone door of this cave for half a day, June girl did not open the door and come out. It's fine if it's like this on a normal day, but if the eagle fruit suddenly ripens and you want to call her, but she can't hear you, what should we do?" Luchin was speechless. Masato Kihara looked at him, his eyes revealing some suspicion and said, "With June girl's intelligence she would not have overlooked this. She must have given you something to contact her at any time, right?" Luchin looked at Masato Kihara also stared at him. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. Luchin suddenly slapped his forehead, shouted loudly and sighed, "AI, look at my memory, Shijisu really gave me a burning heart talisman, a pity that my skills are low and I have never used it before, I actually forgot about it." "Forgot?" Masato Kihara looked at him with a smile that did not seem like a smile. Lu Qin sternly said, "I forgot." Saying so, he took out a yellow stone talisman from his bosom and handed it to Masato Kihara. Masato Kihara took the yellow stone talisman and looked at it, weighing it in his palm a few times, then he was not in a hurry to use it. Instead, he raised his head and looked at Lu Qin again, suddenly smiled and said, "Brat, luckily you were born with a bad innate talent, only one pillar of the 5 elements divine plate, you can only be an odd-job disciple. Otherwise, with your intelligence, wit and cunning as a ghost, if you really had the apex talent of the 4 or 5 pillars, and were properly trained since young, I really don't know who in this world could be your opponent." Lu Qin smiled and said, "Senior, you must be joking." Masato Kihara snorted and did not say anything more. 2 of his fingers held the yellow stone talisman and gently fiddled with it. He didn't see how he cast a spell, but suddenly a flame rose from the stone talisman, swaying and burning. The flame was not big and the temperature was not high, but it looked very bright. It only flickered for a moment, then quickly dimmed. Masato Kihara looked at Lu Qin. Lu Qin said, "Looks like this burning heart talisman is not broken really good." Masato Kihara clicked his tongue and said, "Now I feel that you should be hiding something from me." Lu Qin resolutely shook his head and said, "There is no such thing." Masato Kihara snorted and did not say anything. The 2 of them stood in front of the stone door and waited for a while, but the stone door still did not move, there was no sign of it opening. Masato Kihara's expression gradually became ugly, and he turned to look at Lu Qin. He saw that Lu Qin was staring at the stone door, as if there was the most wonderful and strange thing in the world on the stone door attracting his attention, completely ignoring the wind and grass around him. Masato Kihara's face was cold and he said, "What is going on? If you don't explain clearly to me, be careful I—" Before he finished speaking, they suddenly heard a rush of wind coming from above, mixed with a sharp whistling sound. It came from the dense ancient forest on the mountain wall in front of them. Lu Qin and spiritual master Muyuan looked up at the same time. A moment later, a slim figure flew out of the forest, drawing a graceful arc in the air. She spun lightly and landed like a lithe bird. She was devastatingly beautiful and her eyes were bright. It was none other than Su Qingjun. A fragrant wind blew like clouds falling, a few crystal clear morning dew, like the wings of a bird flying freely in the forest, still lingering on the scarlet feathers on her shoulder. When the sun shone down, it reflected a dreamy and magnificent rainbow. "What is it? Is the eagle fruit ripe?" Just as they landed, Su Qingjun opened her mouth to ask Lu Qin. "Quickly take me there, don't delay." After saying this, she seemed to notice Masato Kihara standing at the side, and only then did she slightly apologetically say to Masato Kihara, "Shifu, you also came. But wait a moment, the eagle fruit is ripe, I am in a hurry to eat it first, I will come to greet you later." Masato Kihara opened her mouth, but didn't say anything, while Lu Qin stood at the side, not moving a single step as if he hadn't heard anything. Su Qingjun took 2 steps forward, then immediately turned her head back with some surprise, looking at Lu Qin saying, "Lu Qin, what is it? Didn't you say that you would only use the heart-burning talisman to call me back when the eagle fruit is ripe? Why haven't you left yet?" Lu Qin remained silent, only looking at Masato Kihara. Masato Kihara was a bit embarrassed, coughing once and said, Qingjun, this eagle fruit is not ripe yet." Su Qingjun was startled for a moment, then a trace of anger flashed across her face and she angrily said to Lu Qin, "Hey Lu Qin, what is the matter with you? Such a big matter, are you treating it as a child's play? You have some guts, you dare to play with me? Let me tell you, believe it or not, Lu Qin clenched his teeth, a gloomy expression on his face, and only silently looked at Masato Kihara. Masato Kihara's old face turned red, and she hurriedly stepped forward to stop Su Qingjun, saying with a bitter smile, Hey, don't be anxious, Qingjun, don't scold little Lu, this matter is not his fault." Su Qingjun snorted, looking very dissatisfied, and glared at Lu Qin, saying angrily, "How is it not his fault? I clearly only gave him the heart-burning talisman, reminding him that he must wait for the eagle fruit to ripen before using it, but the result, I am so angry." Masato Kihara gave a hollow laugh, saying, "This heart-burning talisman? Well, actually, Master used it just now." Su Qingjun was startled, somewhat surprised, and turned to look at Masato Kihara, revealing a puzzled expression, saying, "Master, why did you use this heart-burning talisman? Besides, the eagle fruit hasn't ripened yet." Masato Kihara seemed to dote on this beautiful and peerless female disciple of hers, and usually spoke without any dignity as a master. At this time she could only say with a smile, I came to see you, but the cave residence's stone door didn't open even after I knocked for a long time, so I forced Lu Chen to find you, so I took the heart-burning talisman. Master. Su Qingjun stamped her feet, and although she didn't say anything, the expression in her eyes when looking at Masato Kihara seemed to have said too much. Masato Kihara rolled her eyes and suddenly asked, "By the way, why aren't you in your cave residence so early in the morning? Where have you been?" Su Qingjun snorted and said, "I went to the top of the mountain to practice my swordsmanship. Didn't you teach me that the chi of the morning sun is the key to growth, and it can make up for the lack of the quiet moon?" Masato Kihara nodded and said, That's right, that's right." Saying this, she suddenly smiled and said, "Actually, I came here early in the morning to remind you that although you have to wait for the eagle fruit to ripen and can't leave, you still have to wake up early to practice your swordsmanship. Don't slack off." Standing at the side, Lu Chen immediately looked at this old man in a new light, and a look of admiration appeared in his eyes. He thought to himself, old people are really thick-skinned to be able to say such words so naturally. Su Qingjun glanced at her master, and there was a hint of suspicion in her eyes. She seemed to know Masato Kihara very well, and was very suspicious of what he had just said. Masato Kihara coughed and glared at Su Qingjun and said, "Stupid girl, what are you looking at? Your master is here to give you some advice. Don't be so rude in front of outsiders." Su Qingjun snorted and turned to stand aside. Lu Chen quickly said, You two take your time, I'm going to plant trees in the spiritual field." Saying this, he quickly walked away. Only now did Lu Chen let out a long sigh of relief and thought to himself, these 2,000 spiritual stones are really not easy to earn. However, when he walked to the edge of the spiritual field, he was suddenly startled as he thought of something. In the end, he muttered angrily, "This damn old man, where's the reward he promised me? He's pretending to be dead and not giving it to me." Chapter 156. Lying on the bed in the hut, Lu Chen used his hands as a pillow. His eyes were slightly closed as if he was resting his mind. What happened outside the hut seemed to have nothing to do with him. Noon had passed and it was quiet outside. The Fian platform seemed to have returned to its original state. At this moment there was a sudden knock on the door of the hut. Lu Chen walked over and opened the door. Seeing Su Qingjun standing outside, he smiled and said, "Are you done?" Su Qingjun smiled and said, "Yes, my master has left." Lu Chen breathed a sigh of relief and nodded. Just as he was about to speak, he looked at his shabby hut and said, "This hut is small and shabby. It's too crowded for 2 people to stand. I won't invite you in." Su Qingjun glanced at his hut and was slightly startled. She said, It's not very good." Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said, "This hut was built on your Fian platform. Don't you know?" Su Qingjun said, "I really didn't know. This hut was built by your Baichao Tang people. You see, I can't possibly build a hut for you to live in, right? Besides, I really don't know how to do this." Lu Chen nodded. He thought that if it was really Su Qingjun, this hut might be spacious and comfortable. It was just that the Baichao Tang people looked down on the Ajab disciples. The eagle fruit tree had to be taken care of, but of course no one cared about his hut. It was good enough to have a place to lie down. However, the two of them felt a little awkward talking to each other through a door. Thus, Lu Chen simply walked out of the thatched hut. The two of them stood on the ridge of the spirit field. A few cool breezes blew past and white clouds floated in the distance. It made them feel refreshed all of a sudden. "When did you come back?" Lu Chen asked Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun said, "Just now." Lu Chen clicked his tongue and said, "Then when you activated the heart-burning talisman just now, I arrived just in time. I took a detour to the back of the mountain and came down." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Did I tell you before that you're actually very good at lying when you're serious?" Su Qingjun's fair cheeks blushed slightly and she said angrily, "Nonsense, there's no such thing." Lu Chen laughed and then told her about what happened in the morning. After listening, Su Qingjun's face showed a trace of apology and said, "It's really been hard on you, but I really didn't misjudge you. You really are smarter than them." After a pause, Su Qingjun continued, "The spirit stones are in the immortal's cave. I don't have them on me right now. I'll go back and get them for you later." Lu Chen smiled and waved his hand, and with a carefree expression he said, "You're too kind. How can I not believe you? You can get them whenever you want, there's no hurry." Su Qingjun looked at him and said, "You're really not in a hurry?" Lu Chen said seriously, "No, it's very urgent." Standing at the edge of the field, the mountain breeze blew past. For some reason, probably because the burden on her mind was gone, Su Qingjun had a rare smile on her face and looked relaxed. she looked at the eagle fruit trees and asked, "How are the eagle fruits?" Lucian said, "You're really lucky. There were no accidents and no fruits ripened. But I estimate that from tomorrow onwards, there will be eagle fruits that will ripen. I'll keep an eye on this place. Do you?" Su Qingjun smiled sweetly and said, "I know. I won't go anywhere other than Flying Goose Terrace." Lucian said, "Really?" Su Qingjun said, "Look at what you're saying. I've already said all that, why do you still look like you don't believe me?" "Because you said the same thing yesterday and then secretly ran away last night." Su Qingjun was speechless for a moment. After a while she smiled and said, "Wasn't it because I had urgent matters to attend to? Anyway, now that the urgent matter is over, I really won't leave." Why are you looking at me like that?" Lucian stared at Su Qingjun's beautiful face and after a while he nodded and said, "In the past, I always thought that you were always cold and arrogant. Who would have thought that after getting to know you a little, I would find that you're actually quite easygoing?" Su Qingjun was also slightly startled, and then she felt a little strange in her heart. Other than her own Su family members, this was actually the first time that she had spoken so much to a lowly odd job disciple. She was also a little hesitant, but then she heard Lucian say from the side, "In that case, I have a few words that I don't really want to say, but I don't know if you want to hear them?" Seeing that he was speaking seriously, Su Qingjun's expression also became somewhat serious. After a moment of silence she said solemnly, "Please advise me." Lucian shook his head and said, "It's not really advice. I'm just an odd job disciple and I don't dare to have that kind of thought. It's just that in my opinion you have too many relatives in your family. In the 20 days that you've eaten the eagle fruit, I think it's very difficult for you to guarantee that no one will come looking for you again, right?" Su Qingjun was silent. "If at that time they cry incessantly, saying that they've encountered a huge problem and only you can help solve it, what will you do?" Lucian looked at Su Qingjun's beautiful face and said lightly, "At that time, will you go down the mountain or not? Are you sure there won't be any problems with this choice?" Su Qingjun was silent for a long time, then she smiled bitterly and said softly, "I don't know." Lucian looked at her for a while, then suddenly smiled and said, "You've been tired for the whole morning, go back to sleep." After saying this, Lucian turned around and walked back to the thatched hut. Seeing that somewhat shabby wooden door close in front of her, Su Qingjun slightly lowered her head. The excitement and joy from rushing back in time suddenly disappeared for some reason. She stared blankly at the thatched hut, then looked at the eagle fruit tree in the spirit field. After a while she silently turned around and walked towards the cave in the distance. The Fian Terrace was very quiet in the afternoon. In the blink of an eye, it was dusk and the afterglow of the setting sun shone down. Lucian suddenly saw a gap in the window next to him, and then a woman stood outside and said, "I have a very delicious spirit fruit here, do you want to eat it?" "Yes." Lucian jumped up. Under the setting sun, the Fian Terrace was covered with a layer of red coat. Lucian and Su Qingjun sat side by side on the ridge of the field, a little distance apart. There was a plate in the middle of the ground, on which there were 8 or 9 bright red spirit fruits like peaches, and there were 4 or 5 fruit pits on the ground next to them. Lucian was holding a spirit fruit in his hand and he was chewing it. Su Qingjun looked at him and the expression on her face changed from a little surprise to a little amusement, and then she really laughed and said, "You really don't have to be polite?" Lucian said, "Nonsense, I usually can't eat these spirit fruits, why would I let go of this opportunity? You're really interesting." "I'm a little different from others." "How is it different?" "As a servant disciple, you don't seem to have much respect for me, Jean Dan Friar, and you talk to me very naturally and easygoing, which is rare." "Well, I don't mean anything else, I think it's good this way." Lucian's hand paused for a moment and his eyes flickered and he said, "Is that true? Maybe I heard someone say that before." "Really? Who is it?" Lucian smiled and waved his hand saying, "A bald old guy, far worse than you." "Oh." Su Qingjun nodded, and then she seemed to hesitate for a moment and didn't continue to speak. But Lucian looked at her and then he gently threw away another fruit pit in his hand and then said with a smile, "I've eaten this spirit fruit, you can ask me anything you want." Su Qingjun glared at him and suddenly burst into laughter and then she sighed, "It's so easy to talk to a smart person like you." As she said that she sat up straight and said, "Well, I won't beat around the bush. What you said to me at the end of the day, I actually understand that it's a big problem, but well, anyway, it's a bit difficult and I don't know what to do. Judging from what you said before, maybe you have a good idea?" Lucian clapped his hands and said, "This matter actually depends on how you look at it." "How so?" Those relatives of yours came to bother you with all kinds of things for so long, is it really a matter of life and death? Su Qingjun was silent. Lu Chen said again, you said that people are different from each other, and the small things in our eyes may be a matter of life and death in the eyes of others. But I don't believe that you haven't thought that those things really can't be delayed, right? Delay it for a few days and you don't have to deal with it immediately, okay? Su Qingjuan's gaze swept into the distance, still not saying a word, but this silence seemed to have explained something. After a while, Su Qingjun nodded and said softly, what you said actually makes a lot of sense, but sometimes I still can't put down your pride? Lu Chen said lightly. Su Qingjun smiled bitterly. To be honest, it's also the first time I've seen a proud daughter of an aristocratic family like you. Lu Chen said, I always feel that the whole Su family has to be on my shoulders, and I have to solve everything by myself. When others come to beg you, you're shy and embarrassed to refuse them. Su Qingjun frowned with some distress, and after a while she suddenly realized that the surroundings had quietened down. She raised her head in surprise and looked at Lu Chen and said, why don't you continue? Lu Chen sighed and said, I've already said it so directly, so seriously, and you're still not angry? Su Qingjun shook her head and said, what you said is the truth, what's there for me to be angry about? Lu Chen stared at her for a while, and the gaze in the depths of his eyes gradually became gentler, and then he nodded and said, all right. I have a way to help you. Chapter 157. Su Qingjuan's eyes lit up and she said, what method? Lu Chen glanced at her and said, you don't need to see those people. Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment and then she said angrily, how is that possible they? Halfway through her words she suddenly paused and looked thoughtfully at Lu Chen. She seemed to have thought of something and said, you mean you're going to? Lu Chen said straightforwardly, I'm going to stop them. You hide in the cave and pretend you don't know about these things. This. Su Qingjun was a little stunned for a moment. She looked a little tempted on the surface, but she seemed to be a little worried. Lu Chen looked on from the side and also felt a little emotional. He didn't expect that the genius girl of the Su family who was so valued by the outside world would have such a tangled temperament. One really couldn't judge a book by its cover. However, she valued her family so much. Wasn't this the kind of kinship that he had never had in his life? What kind of kinship was that? Lu Chen shook his head and said to Su Qingjun, think about it yourself. Anyway, I've told you what to do. The final decision is up to you. Su Qingjuan's expression changed. After a moment, she suddenly gritted her teeth and said, okay, I'll do as you say. Seeing that she had made up her mind so quickly, Lu Chen was a little surprised and said, you've thought it through? Su Qingjun nodded and said with a resolute expression, yes, this time I've thought it through. What you said just now is all right. No one has said it to me so clearly in the past, or maybe I'm clear in my heart, but I can't bring myself to say it. In short, I feel that this time, I still have to focus on my own cultivation and put aside the family matters for the time being. Lu Chen grunted and said, since you've made up your mind, then it's easy. But there are still some words that I have to say to you first. Su Qingjun said, say it. First, you cannot be soft-hearted. You know very well what your relatives are like. When the time comes when they cry and beg, you will pretend that you can't see or hear them. You will just stay in the cave and not come out. All right. Su Qingjun nodded heavily. It seemed that she had made up her mind this time. Lu Chen continued, secondly, your Su family is an aristocratic family, and the children of your family are all proud and arrogant. If they are stopped by an unknown odd-job disciple like me, they might get angry and want to teach me a lesson. At that time, if I use my power to bully others and act recklessly, I will naturally deserve to be beaten. But if I'm on the side of reason, will you support me? Su Qingjun was startled and said, if they really bullied you for no reason, of course I have to protect you. Lu Chen smiled and suddenly slapped his cheeks, saying, they hit my face, I can't and don't have the strength to fight back. Then after you come out, what will you do? Will you lightly scold them or will you hit them back? Lu Chen stared at Su Qingjun, his mouth lightly said words of criticism. Su Qingjun became silent again, but this time she kept looking at Lu Chen, her eyes suddenly became somewhat cold. Why do I suddenly feel that you seem to be trying to sow discord between me and my family? Su Qingjun said softly. We have only known each other for a short time. As the saying goes, strangers do not get close. Do you think I can do that? Lu Chen asked her in reply. Su Qingjun stood up and said, then how can you ask me to do this for you? Lu Chen also slowly stood up and looked at the beautiful woman in front of him, saying, Then why should I help you do this kind of strenuous and unrewarding thing? Am I crazy? Su Qingjun was stunned speechless. Under the setting sun, the shadows of the two of them were stretched very long on the ground. Su Qingjun looked at the slender figure and was in a trance for a moment. It seemed that she wanted to say something but she swallowed it back. You see, the principles in this world are all the same. If you can't do this, I can't help you. Lu Chen said calmly, I know that in the past you probably always thought that others should be happy to help you, regardless of the reward, regardless of the gains or losses, and you also take care of your family in the same way. But I am different. Lu Chen said in a very calm but firm tone, this kind of thing, I must make you make up your mind and clearly stand on my side, only then I dare to help you. I am just a small figure, the weakest and smallest odd-job disciple in Kunlun Mountain. Anyone can bully me, right? An ant also has an ant's way of living. Su Qingjuan's expression changed slightly as if she was a little shocked, but in the end she did not speak. Lu Chen did not say anything more to her, but turned around and walked back to the straw hut, at the same time saying, It's late, go back and rest. It's getting late. Go back and rest. I will call you tomorrow when the eagle fruit ripens. The moon rose and set, the stars changed and the quiet night passed quietly. A new day had begun. After walking out of the straw hut, Lu Chen faced the morning sun and stretched, then casually walked around the flying goose platform, before returning to the spiritual field and began to busy himself. In the middle of it, he looked at the cave abode once, only to see that the stone door was tightly shut, and there was no movement all morning. In response, he only smiled and did not say anything more, just buried his head in what he was doing. About an hour before noon, Lu Chen, who was preparing to leave the spiritual field to rest, suddenly smelled a strange fragrance. His body trembled slightly and he immediately looked up, then turned around twice in the spiritual field, and soon saw that on a certain fruit tree, an eagle fruit had ripened. Lu Chen clicked his tongue twice as if he was admiring it, but also as if he found it funny. Then he took out the yellow stone talisman from his bosom, and with a whoosh, the strange flame ignited. Then he turned his head to look at the stone door of the cave abode on the mountain wall. At first it was still quiet there. But soon, suddenly, a rumbling sound came from the stone door, breaking the silence. After a moment, a figure rushed out with a whoosh, like an arrow released from a bow, and swept to the side of the spiritual field. It was Su Qingjun. Was it you who ignited the heart-burning talisman? An eagle fruit has ripened? As soon as she stopped, she asked hurriedly. Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then immediately pointed in the direction of the ripened eagle fruit behind him. Su Qingjuan's body floated up, and easily jumped into the air, plucking the fruit. It was only the size of a thumb and she swallowed it in one gulp. Then, after letting out a sigh of relief, she directly sat cross-legged on the ridge of the field. It seemed that she was adjusting her breathing and digesting this rare fruit. And Lu Chen looked at her with interest. At this moment, Su Qingjun could not say that her clothes were disheveled, but it was also not her usual attire. Her originally meticulous hair was still messy, and a few strands of beautiful hair hung down. Her clothes were mostly loose, and although she was not naked, it looked like a girl's bedroom pajamas. There was no makeup on her face, and there was a faint trace of tiredness in her expression. As Lu Chen looked at her, a strange expression suddenly appeared on his face. After about the time to drink a cup of tea, probably digesting the eagle fruit, Su Qingjun let out a long breath, stood up and said, Sure enough, the fresh eagle fruit is different from the others. It is indeed very useful for me to stabilize my Jindan realm. Of course, no matter what, your master Masato Kihara is an experienced and knowledgeable Yuanying Jinren, she would not lie. Lu Chen replied. Su Qingjun nodded and said, Thank you. Saying this, she intended to turn around and walk back to the cave residence. But at this time she suddenly heard Lu Chen suddenly ask behind her, Shiji Su, if I may be so bold as to ask. Looking at your attire, could it be that you were still sleeping? But at this time she suddenly heard Lu Chen suddenly ask, Nonsense, there is no such thing. Su Qingjuan's body stiffened, and a trace of embarrassment flashed across her face. She said, Nonsense, there's no such thing. After that, she lowered her head and walked away quickly. Lu Chen looked at her back thoughtfully. Cultivators were also humans. Naturally, they would also sleep and rest. There was nothing strange about this in itself. But the problem was that Su Qingjun was famous for being obsessed with cultivation and diligent. According to the rumors in the Kunlun party, she was a model disciple who would wake up early in the morning and train hard at night. The general meaning of the rumors was to warn everyone that this genius was extremely diligent and had a bit of talent to achieve such achievements. Then Lu Qin saw that the sun was already high up in the sky, and this beautiful woman was actually sleeping in his cave residence alone. This matter was too shocking, too unexpected. Something wasn't right. Lu Qin couldn't quite believe his own eyes. But very quickly he thought of the details of those things that happened earlier. Early in the morning there was no response for a long time. Maybe she wasn't cultivating and didn't hear me. Maybe she was sleeping and didn't hear me. After such a long time, she must have spent quite a lot of time to dress up and dress herself up to her usual meticulous appearance. Everyone, even the Su family members whom she valued the most, are not allowed to enter her cave residence. They can only talk outside? In her cave residence, only she can enter alone. What's so strange about it? Could it be that she had just woken up and her bed is messy and afraid of being seen by others? Lu Qin was also in a daze. Suddenly he gave a wry smile. He wondered if recently he had thought too much about tracking down the evil sect spies. His mind was not very clear. Everything he saw would lead to a bunch of things. Forget it, I don't care if she sleeps in or not. It has nothing to do with me. Lu Qin shook his head and walked towards the hut. In the distance, Su Qingjun had already walked into the cave residence. The stone door behind her closed with a rumble, once again sealing the cave residence. This was the only time the two of them met each other, and also the only time they had a conversation. Time passed by in the blink of an eye. Soon, it was the 4th day of Lu Qin's stay at the Flying Goose platform. This morning the eagle fruits had not ripened yet. But when the sun had just risen in the sky, 3 people suddenly came to the entrance of the cave residence. It was Sumo, Su Qian and Su Wen. They had bloody noses and swollen faces. They looked to be in a sorry state. They ran to the stone door of the cave residence and knelt down with a plop. Then they shouted, Sister June, you have to help us." Chapter 158. The cries spread throughout the quiet Fian terrace. Of course, it also alerted Lu Qin, who was in the thatched hut. However, he had no intention of going over to join in the fun. He just leaned against the door and took a bite of a wild fruit he had plucked from somewhere. Then, with a faint smile on his face, he looked over to the side from afar. The 3 brothers of the Su family obviously knew that there was an outsider in the Fian terrace. However, the situation was urgent, so they couldn't care so much. It was not a big deal to let an unfamiliar odd-job disciple watch the fun. What was more important was to not let Su Qingjun feel that she was not pitiful enough and that she did not beg sincerely enough. The stone door stood as steady as Mount Tai and did not move for a long time. The 3 brothers of the Su family did not seem to be surprised. They just kept banging on the door and shouting. Lu Qin chewed on the juicy fruit and looked up at the sky. The sun had just risen and it was still early in the morning. He smiled and muttered to himself, "It's so annoying to disturb people's dreams so early in the morning." After an hour, under the calls of the 3 brothers of the Su family, the stone door finally rumbled open. Then Su Qingjun walked out of the cave. Lu Qin glanced at her from afar. He saw that Su Qingjun was dressed neatly from head to toe. Her hair was meticulously combed, and her appearance was dignified and beautiful. It seemed that every bit of her was exquisite and beautiful to the point of perfection. It was amazing to see. However, in the depths of her eyes, under that calm gaze, there seemed to be a faint trace of anger that was difficult to detect. It was like the undercurrent under the calm surface of the water, with slight ripples that could not be detected. "Oh." Lu Qin smiled and grinned. He said, "You're angry when you wake up, Sister June." When the 3 brothers of the Su family saw Su Qingjun come out, their voices immediately became louder. Their faces were full of sorrow as if they had encountered something sad. The 3 men were just short of crying bitterly. Su Qingjun's beautiful eyes swept across the 3 of them, and her face stiffened for a moment. However, she quickly controlled herself, and subconsciously glanced at the spiritual field in the distance. Lu Qin leaned against the door frame and waved his hand casually with a smile, as if he was greeting her on this beautiful morning. Su Qingjun's face darkened. She glared at the man in the distance, then frowned at the 3 people in front of her. She said lightly, "What's going on?" Sumo and the others hurriedly came forward. Just as they were about to express their grievances, they heard Su Qingjun suddenly shout, "Lower your voice. Don't you feel embarrassed?" The 3 Su family brothers nodded at the same time and glanced at Lu Qin. Lu Qin smiled, turned around and walked into the depths of the spiritual field, no longer watching. However, there was still a smile on his face and he muttered to himself, You clearly want to avoid arousing suspicion, but you still don't let people into your cave residence? On the other side, after seeing Lu Chen walk away, Sumo and the others hurriedly surrounded Su Qingjun, and then began to talk about something. As Su Qingjun listened, her face gradually became ugly, and her eyes also became cold. There were 2 times when her arms and her sleeves trembled slightly, as if she wanted to lift them up to do something, but in the end she resisted. In the gap between the waves of words, she occasionally looked into the distance from the corner of her eyes. The sea of clouds outside the Flying Goose platform was white and vast. Under the clear sky, it was so beautiful and dazzling. Lu Chen worked in the spiritual field for the whole morning, and came out at about noon. He scooped a few spoonfuls of water from the wooden bucket beside him and drank to his heart's content. Then he saw Su Qingjuan's figure standing on the ridge of the field, silently looking at the spiritual field here, and also glanced at his face. The other 3 youths of the Su family were now nowhere to be seen. Lu Chen smiled and said to Su Qingjun, "Have they left?" Su Qingjun hummed in acknowledgement. "Let's go." Lu Chen nodded and walked over to sit on the ridge of the field, not far from Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun glanced at him and asked, "Are there eagle fruits ripe today?" "Not yet." Lu Chen pointed to the tree in front of him and said, "But there are 1 or 2 fruits that are turning red. If we are lucky they might ripen in the afternoon." Su Qingjun was silent for a moment and then said calmly, "Okay." With that, she turned and walked back to the cave residence. Lu Chen did not say anything more and did not even turn back to look at her back. Amidst the refreshing and comfortable morning breeze, amidst the rustling and swaying tree leaves, the 2 of them parted just like that. From beginning to end, Lu Chen did not ask the 3 Su family brothers why they came, and Su Qingjun also did not say a word. Around 5:15 in the afternoon, an eagle fruit ripened. Lu Chen, who had been patiently guarding the spiritual field, immediately activated the heart-burning talisman. Not long after, the stone door rumbled open and Su Qingjun came over. Compared to yesterday morning, Su Qingjun did not hide her embarrassment today, and seemed much calmer. However, she did not speak much. After coming over, under Lu Chen's guidance, she plucked the ripe eagle fruit, ate it, and then adjusted her breath to activate the medicine. Everything was carried out in an orderly manner, and it seemed that the 2 of them did not even need to say a word. This unexpected coldness seemed a little awkward, but from another perspective, it seemed to be a sudden tacit understanding. After eating the eagle fruit there was nothing else to do. Su Qingjun stood up and seemed to want to leave. Lu Chen also patted his butt and seemed to want to return to the straw hut. But at this moment, Su Qingjun suddenly asked, "Will there be any more ripe fruits today?" Lu Chen was startled at first and then looked at the spiritual field. After a moment of silence, he said, "The other fruits that have not ripened by this time should not be very likely. We will have to wait until tomorrow." Su Qingjun nodded, indicating that she understood. But for some reason she still stood on the ridge of the field and did not leave. Lu Chen sensed something and looked at her, then frowned and said, "Do you have something to say?" Su Qingjun was silent for a while, then softly said, "There is a small problem." Lu Chen shook his head and did not say anything. Su Qingjun looked at his expression and slightly pursed her lips and said, "Do you think I am quite stupid?" "Yes," Lu Chen said. "Hey." Su Qingjun did not seem to expect Lu Chen to be so direct. She was stunned for a moment, then her cheeks turned red and she said with some annoyance, How can you say that?" Lu Chen said matter-of-factly, "You asked me, don't tell me you want to hear me lie." Su Qingjun stared at him for a while. Anger appeared on her face at first, but she gradually calmed down. Soon, her expression turned into one of self-mockery. She sighed and said, "That's probably the case. Lies always sound better." Lu Chen shrugged and did not reply. Su Qingjun lowered her head slightly and looked hesitant, but in the end still said, "I may still have to go down the mountain once." Lu Chen shook his head, faintly looked at her and still did not say anything. Su Qingjun didn't know why. She was clearly far superior to Lu Chen, an ordinary errand disciple, both in terms of cultivation and status. However, when she spoke, she felt an indescribable sense of guilt, as if she had done something wrong. This feeling made her a little angry, a little embarrassed, but there was also a faint sense of guilt that she could not describe. Why would she have such a strange feeling? She herself could not explain it. She raised her head, looked at Lu Chen, after a moment of hesitation said, Can you help me again?" Lu Chen said, "When will you be back?" Su Qingjun immediately said, I will secretly go down the mountain now. If everything goes well, I can rush back tonight. She specially emphasized the word, tonight, and then softly said, you see, counting from now at most another hour, the sky will be dark, no one will come here at night, so this time I should not trouble you too much. And I will try my best. Lu Chen nodded. Su Qingjun gave him a deep look. She seemed to want to say something, but in the end she hesitated and only nodded silently. Then she turned around and walked forward. Hey! Suddenly Lu Chen's voice came from behind. Su Qingjun turned to look at him and said, what is it? If you come back too late, there will be disciples patrolling the mountain during the curfew. Be careful, don't get caught. A faint light flashed in Su Qingjun's bright eyes, her gaze clear, and after a moment she suddenly smiled sweetly, like a spring breeze blowing over a peaceful lake, like a green willow swaying in the wind, like a delicate flower blooming in an instant, like a beautiful embellishing the scenery. For a moment, the surroundings actually brightened. She only saw her nod and said with a smile, okay, I understand. In the afternoon, as Lu Chen had predicted, there were no eagle fruits ripening in the spirit fields, and fortunately, no other Su family members came to the Flying Goose Terrace again. So Lu Chen had a peaceful afternoon, and very soon the sky became dark. The night wind whistled past, sounding louder than a few days ago, and it seemed to be a little chilly tonight. The silent Kunlun Mountains stood majestically in the night, like the silhouettes of huge giants. Lu Chen sat in the shadow of the Flying Goose Terrace, from where he could see the mountain path in the distance, but he himself was like a deep shadow, blending into the surrounding darkness. Time passed quietly, and Lu Chen waited silently and patiently. When he raised his head to look at the night sky again, the sky was dark and it was already past midnight. Su Qingjun was still nowhere to be seen. Expressionless, Lu Chen continued to sit in the darkness, and just like that, another 2 hours passed. When there was still no movement in front of him, he frowned slightly and stood up from the darkness. He walked to the mountain path beside the Flying Goose Terrace and glanced down. Just as he was hesitating, he suddenly saw a figure suddenly rush out from the darkness in the distance, which seemed to be so thick that it could not be dispersed. The figure swept towards him, but when she was about 10 feet away from him, her body suddenly swayed and she fell to the ground. Lu Chen was shocked and hurriedly rushed over to catch her. Upon a closer look, he saw that it was Su Qingjun. He saw that at this moment her face was pale, but she was still conscious. She glanced at Lu Chen and smiled. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but at this moment her body suddenly trembled, and with a soft cry, a mouthful of hot blood sprayed directly on Lu Chen's face and chest. Chapter 159. The blood was warm, and when it flowed down the skin of her cheeks, there was a prickling feeling. After Su Qingjun spat out a mouthful of blood, her body seemed to suddenly lose the strength to support it, and her whole body went limp. Lu Chen frowned and called out to Su Qingjun. Seeing that she did not respond, her face seemed abnormally pale in the dim light. He no longer hesitated. One hand passed under Su Qingjun's neck to support her shoulders, and the other hand passed under her legs. Then he used strength with both hands and directly carried Su Qingjun's body. He strode back to the Flying Goose Terrace. Just as he took 2 steps towards the cave residence, he looked down and saw that Su Qingjun's eyes were closed, as if she had lost consciousness. He immediately turned and ran to his straw hut, kicked the door open, and then placed Su Qingjun's body on the bed. A little candlelight was lit up in the middle of the night. The straw hut lit up. Lu Chen's expression was solemn. He glanced at the unconscious Su Qingjun, and first grabbed one of her arms to feel her pulse. Then his expression suddenly changed. Under the dim light, a trace of anxiety flashed across his expression, but other than that he did not panic. His gaze then swept over Su Qingjun's limbs and body, but everything seemed to be normal. After a moment, his gaze suddenly stopped on Su Qingjun's left shoulder. The clothes there seemed to be sagging down compared to the rest of the clothes, and the color was a little abnormal. Under the candlelight it looked like a small shadow. Lu Chen did not hesitate at all. He directly used his hands to tear off the clothes, and saw a piece of white and delicate skin. But what was shocking was that there was a purplish-black palm print on the shoulder. On the snow-like white skin, the black palm print was even more strange, and it faintly emitted a fishy smell. Lu Chen snorted coldly and his eyes flashed twice. Suddenly, his right hand turned over, and a black short sword appeared in his palm. The incomparably sharp blade reflected a cold light under the candlelight. He raised his hand and waved the sword and directly stabbed down. A sharp piercing sound suddenly sounded in that short moment, and the sudden cold wind caused the candlelight to sway, bringing with it a little chill. The next moment, the cold blade had directly pierced into Su Qingjuan's shoulder. Su Qingjuan's body suddenly trembled. Lu Qin seemed even more cold-blooded and merciless at this moment. He didn't even spare a glance at Su Qingjuan's beautiful face that was filled with pain. He gripped the hilt of his sword and pressed it down. The cold blade immediately cut through the flesh on the woman's shoulder. Black blood instantly gushed out, leaving behind a deep wound that made one's hair stand on end. Ah! Su Qingjun screamed and her whole body instantly curled up. Her body trembled violently and her face was pale. Her eyes, which had been tightly closed, seemed to suddenly wake up from the pain. With a head full of cold sweat and a pale face, she opened them. The first thing she saw was the man with his back facing the candlelight, standing in front of her with a solemn expression. "Don't talk nonsense, listen to me." This was the first sentence she heard after she woke up. There was no comfort, no sympathy, not even any question, just an emotionless indifference. "There's poison in the wound, I'm giving you poisonous blood." Su Qingjun looked down at her left shoulder, gasping for breath. "You must take medicine, there's no medicine here." "Two choices. First, I will immediately go down the mountain to find someone to help. Second, you open the Immortal's cave and look for your own Ling Dan, do you have it?" Lu Qin said coldly, and his hands moved slowly but never stopped. As the blade moved forward, Su Qingjuan's body kept trembling. She clenched her teeth, but she couldn't suppress the painful moans. Even the corner of her eyes became misty. As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Qin immediately sheathed his blade and stopped. He glanced at Su Qingjun, then turned around to leave. But at this moment, Su Qingjun, who was lying on the bed, suddenly grabbed his hand. She gasped in pain and with a hoarse voice she said with difficulty, "Don't go down the mountain, go to my side." Lu Qin immediately turned around and was about to carry Su Qingjun like before. But when he looked at her shoulder, he saw that after the black blood had dried up, the blood inside had turned red, but the pale skin seemed to be almost transparent, without any color, and was slightly trembling in the air. He took off his coat and covered Su Qingjuan's body. Then he carried her again and rushed out of the hut. Su Qingjun was lying in his arms. There was a strange sense of dizziness that kept hitting her head like a crazy tide. In a trance she saw in the dark night, the mysterious and vast sky. There were dark clouds, there were stars, and they were all far away in the sky. Everything was shaking, and when he ran, the trembling came from his body, rushing forward step by step. There was a cold wind blowing on her face. But for some reason it didn't seem too cold. The sky was spinning and the earth was spinning, and the world seemed to be constantly changing. That part of the road was clearly very short in her memory, but on this night, it felt like a lifetime. She snuggled in his arms and leaned against his chest. This night was cold and lonely. Who was the one tossing and turning? Who was the one who woke up from the dream and fell into a deep sleep? When the sky was about to break, the sunlight fell on the green pines, ancient trees, strange rocks, and rock walls on the Fian platform, when the red sun in the distance was about to burst out from behind the thick layers of clouds. The Fian platform was still quiet. The silence of the night still lingered here, like the remnants of a dream that had yet to wake up. The morning wind blew over the edge of the cliff with moist clouds. A beautiful wildflower swayed in the wind on the cliff, blooming with the most beautiful grace. Lu Qin stood in the wind, looking at the wildflower. Then he looked into the distance, staring at the end of the sky. The round of the sun finally leaped up from the vast sea of clouds and rose into the sky. Tens of thousands of rays of golden light fell from the sky, turning the endless sea of clouds into a golden color. It was so bright that one couldn't look at it directly. The mountain wind blew and his clothes fluttered. He didn't know how long he stood, but suddenly he heard the rumbling of a stone door in the distance. There were light footsteps walking towards him. Lu Qin turned and saw Su Qingjun wrapped tightly in a white fox cloak walking over. Her face was still pale, but her complexion was much better. In the light of the morning he could see that she didn't put on any makeup, so her hair was still a little messy, and the corners of her eyes showed some tiredness. She walked to Lu Qin's side and stood, also looking at the distant morning sun, but she didn't say anything. "You should rest more in the cave abode," Lu Qin looked at her and said. Su Qingjun smiled, her hand stretched out from under the cloak, and handed him a coat. It was the one from last night. Lu Qin took it. Su Qingjun quietly said, "There are blood stains on the clothes." Lu Qin said, "It's okay, I'll wash it with water later." Su Qingjun quietly responded. There seemed to be a touch of shyness on her face. After hesitating, her cheeks slightly red, she quietly said, I don't really know how to wash clothes. Lu Chen laughed, nodded and said, "It's okay, I know." Su Qingjun smiled, let out a long breath, and walked 2 steps towards the cliff. Lu Chen looked behind her, frowned and said, "Are you really okay?" Su Qingjun shook her head, smiled and said, "It's not a big deal. Last night, thanks to you treating my injuries in time, releasing the poisonous blood, and after taking the spirit pills I prepared, my injuries are more or less like this." As she said this, she seemed to think of something. A trace of mischievousness suddenly flashed across her face and said, "Don't look down on Jean Dan Fryer's recovery ability." Lu Chen smiled and nodded, said, "That's good." A gust of cold wind blew. Su Qingjun lightly coughed a few times, then said to Lu Chen, "What happened last night, can you please keep it a secret?" Lu Chen said, "Sure, I'll pretend I didn't see anything." Su Qingjun looked at him deeply, said, "It's not just about my injuries." Lu Chen said, "And it's not just you who's injured." Su Qingjun hesitated, seemed to feel that she still had to say more clearly and softly said, "And inside my cave abode. Also, I didn't enter that cave abode at all." Lu Chen said. Su Qingjun first smiled, then sighed and said, "I owe you a big favor." Lu Chen said, "There's no hurry, there's plenty of time in the future, you can slowly return it." Su Qingjun was amused by him and couldn't help but laugh and said, "You're really an interesting person." Lu Chen smiled and then said, "Although you're a very powerful Jean Dan Fryer, right now, standing on the wind must not be too comfortable. Why don't we go to the spiritual field to take a look?" Okay. Su Qingjun agreed. The two walked to the other side of the spiritual field. Along the way, Su Qingjun was always about half a step behind Lu Chen. There were a few times when she seemed to want to say something, but every time she held back. When they walked to the edge of the spiritual field, Lu Chen pointed at the eagle fruit tree below and said, "If there are eagle fruits that ripen today, can you eat them?" Su Qingjun was startled, as if she hadn't thought about this question. After a moment of hesitation, she said uncertainly, I should be able to?" Lu Chen looked at her, a little speechless. Su Qingjun seemed a little embarrassed and said, "I'm not very familiar with things like spirit pills." Lu Chen shrugged and said, "Then eat them first. Since they're spirit fruits, even if they don't have much of an effect, there won't be any harm." Su Qingjun nodded, and after a moment she suddenly opened her mouth to ask Lu Chen, "Lu Chen, I have something to ask you." "Oh, go ahead." Su Qingjun looked at him quietly and even reached out to brush a strand of her hair and then said, "You're only a servant disciple, but when you saved me last night, your courage, decisiveness, and even the method to break my body and bleed for me were all very high level." She smiled, but there wasn't much of a smile in her eyes, and softly said, "Who are you, Lu Chen?" Chapter 160. The Flying Goose Terrace was quiet for a while, with a few mountain breezes blowing. Because Lu Chen did not speak, Su Qingjun also quietened down. She looked at him calmly, as if waiting for his answer with unusual patience. After a while, Lu Chen said, "Can I not answer this question?" Su Qingjun thought about it and said, "You just helped me so much, I definitely can't force you. It's fine if you don't want to say it, but I really want to know." Lu Chen smiled, then turned and walked away saying, "Thank you for your understanding." Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment, then shouted at his back, "You really don't want to say?" Lu Chen smiled and waved at her. Then he walked into his thatched hut. Su Qingjun was momentarily angry. In the past, any young man in front of her would mostly be in fear and trepidation. Answering every question she asked was also the right thing to do. She did not expect to meet with a soft rebuff today. She glared at the straw hut, clenched her teeth, and angrily wrapped her cloak tighter around herself, then turned and strode away. However, after walking for a while, she suddenly stopped again, her brows slightly furrowed as if she had forgotten something. After a while she turned back, walked to the door of the straw hut and knocked on the door. "Please come in." Lu Chen's voice came from inside. Su Qingjun opened the door and saw Lu Chen sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at her and saying, "What's wrong?" "And there's something." Su Qingjun said, "The matter you mentioned to me before, I thought about it a few times and I think, still." For some reason she seemed to be at a loss at the end and her words were not very clear. Lu Chen looked strangely at Su Qingjun asking, "What is it?" Su Qingjun was silent for a moment. It seemed that she had finally made up her mind. She said, "During this period of time, you will help me stop the other members of the Su family." Lu Chen was slightly surprised. "You've actually thought it through?" Su Qingjun smiled bitterly. She said softly, "First, I'm injured now. It's not good for me to meet people like this, and it's not good for others to know the truth. I need you to help me. Second, after last night, I'm actually a little cold-hearted. I also feel that it's not good to take care of you like this. Lu Chen frowned and said, I haven't asked you, but what happened last night? Su Qingjun said indifferently, it's not a big deal. Sumo's group of 3 are used to being insolent in Kunwu City. They provoked someone and got into a conflict. After a big fight, they asked someone else to fight again. They said that person was only a very strong cultivator at the peak of the foundation building realm. Who would have thought that in the end, another person with strange Taoist techniques, Jindan Friar, would appear? Lu Chen was silent. After a moment he nodded and said, no wonder. Su Qingjun also seemed unwilling to talk about this topic. She looked up at Lu Chen and said, can you help me with this matter? Lu Chen smiled. He met her gaze and said, you're only asking me to help you stop people because it's not good for you to meet people. I don't want to do this. Su Qingjun frowned and said, why? If I help you with this matter, I'll offend many people in the Su family. Have you thought about it? Lu Chen said indifferently, I'm neither your relative nor friend, and I have no enmity with the other people in the Su family. Why should I provoke this kind of trouble? Su Qingjun was startled. She seemed to be surprised by Lu Chen's sudden coldness and outspokenness. She said, didn't you? Lu Chen gently waved his hand and said, in fact, you still feel from the bottom of your heart that it's only right and proper for others to help you, don't you? Su Qingjun was silent for a long time. Then she lightly pursed her lips and said, I was wrong. Her complexion was a bit pale because of her injuries, but it also added a bit of a graceful beauty that made people feel sorry for her. However, Lu Chen seemed to turn a blind eye to this. He just calmly looked at her without saying a word. Su Qingjun raised her head and looked at him. She said, I've thought about it. It's not good for me to show my current appearance to others. I do need your help this time. Are you willing to help me? If you need me to give you some compensation, we can discuss it. At this point, she seemed to be a little embarrassed and said with a hint of self-mockery, anyway, I just owed you a huge favor. I'll owe you a little more in the future. I'll just treat it as if I'll repay you slowly in the future. Lu Chen looked at her slightly pale but still beautiful face. After a while, he suddenly sighed and said, since it's come to this, I'll help you to the end. Su Qingyan immediately smiled sweetly and said, thank you. You're really a good person. A good person. Lu Chen murmured and shook his head. He then looked at Su Qingjun and said seriously, I can help you with this matter, but I can't do it alone. In order to stop someone, I will definitely offend someone. So you must support me. Su Qingjun nodded and said, okay. Lu Chen had no intention of brushing it off. Instead, he stared into her eyes and said, I'll make it clear. I want you to support me. You can ignore ordinary insults, but if someone attacks me, you'll hit him where he hits me. You'll have to return double the amount of damage. Su Qingjun suddenly became silent. After a while, she smiled bitterly and said, I really want to agree, but I'm really worried that when the time comes, I won't be able to do it. Lu Chen nodded and looked at the woman with a gentler gaze. He said, it's rare that you're willing to tell me the truth. After a pause he said, or do you feel embarrassed? Yes. Su Qingjun said with some distress, I also know that the people in my family are not all good people. There are also many bad things. But we all grew up in a family, and there are so many relatives connected by blood. I grew up among these people. It's really, even if they always take advantage of you and make you work hard for them, even if you get injured and vomit blood, none of them come to see you. Can't you feel embarrassed like this? Su Qingjun looked like she was struggling. In the end, she smiled bitterly and said, my master also reprimanded me for this matter several times. He also scolded me that if I don't change my mind, it will be difficult for me to become a great person in the future. Lu Chen was startled and said with some surprise, that old man Mu Yuan actually said that to you? Su Qingjun sighed and said, Master loves me so much that he hates me for not becoming steel. Of course, these words can't be taken seriously. Hey, don't talk nonsense. How dare you call my master an old man? She lowered her voice and said, my master is good to me, but his temper is not so good to others. Be careful not to be caught by him, then you will be in trouble. Lu Chen looked at her and suddenly laughed. He nodded and said, all right, because of what you said, I will teach you a way. What way? Su Qingjun was a little surprised. Lu Chen said seriously, don't you think your attitude is wrong? It seems a little, but this is the devil in the heart. Lu Chen suddenly interrupted Su Qingjun's words. Su Qingjun was startled and said, "What? Devil in the heart?" "Yes, devil in the heart." Lu Chen said seriously, "Hey, don't look at me with that kind of expression, okay? Although, I know the term, devil in the heart. It sounds really stupid, always giving people the feeling that you are a swindler. How can you be worthy of a prestigious sect like ours? But, think about it, everything about you is good. In the eyes of outsiders, you are almost a perfect girl. But when it comes to the people from the Su family, you become like this. There is something wrong, right?" Su Qingjun nodded slowly and said, "Yes." Lu Chen said again, "Actually, I see that you are so smart, you might have thought about these things in your heart. You just can't think of a way to get rid of these burdens in your heart, right?" "Burdens in the heart? Devil in the heart?" Su Qingjun murmured a few words. Her eyes brightened a little and looked at Lu Chen and said, "You really have a way?" "Yes, of course, whether it works or not depends on the person." "What way? Let me hear it." "Flip the table." "Flip the table?" "Yes, flip the table." At this moment, Su Qingjun only felt that her mind was in a mess. She always felt that everything the man in front of her said was too unreliable. But somewhere in her heart, there seemed to be a strange expectation. Maybe it works? Maybe it really works? But what is the way to flip the table? Su Qingjun asked in distress, looking at Lu Chen with a face of disbelief. "Look, I have a table here." Lu Chen pointed to the only wooden table in the thatched hut. "Oh. You hold it?" Lu Chen said. Su Qingjun looked at him strangely. She wondered if she had been beaten silly. But after hesitating for a while, she still slowly walked over and held the table with her hand. "How does it feel?" Lu Chen asked. "Oh, this is made of wood," Su Qingjun said. Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said, "Nonsense. What else?" Su Qingjun thought for a while and said, "The surface is quite rough and not very smooth. The grain of the tree is also ordinary. It shouldn't be some precious wood. The workmanship is SOSO. It doesn't look valuable and—" "Hey!" Lu Chen angrily stopped her and said impatiently, "You woman! Why do you think differently from ordinary people all the time? Let me ask you, this table is made of wood. Is it very heavy?" Su Qingjun's fair fingers grabbed the edge of the table and lifted it. Then she looked at Lu Chen and said, "It's not heavy. Have you forgotten that I am Jean Dan Friar?" "You." Lu Chen looked up at the sky and revealed an expression as if there was nothing left to live for. After a while, he lowered his head as if he was barely controlling his emotions and the muscles on his face. He said, "Like this, you have to think of this table as the heaviest thing in the world. Because on top of it, it is the devil in your heart that you can't get rid of all these years. It is the hesitation and entanglement that you can't get rid of." Su Qingjun's expression immediately darkened and turned solemn. Lu Chen's eyes lit up. He clapped his hands and said, "That's it. Then you can flip the table as if you have gotten rid of all the devils in your heart." Flip. Flip the table. Boom. There was a loud noise and the flying goose platform seemed to shake. A wooden table broke out of the house and flew high into the air. After a long while, it landed heavily on the ground and broke into pieces with a "pah" sound. The surroundings were quiet. After a while, Lu Chen's angry voice suddenly came from the dilapidated hut. He shouted, "Hey! Are you going to flip the table or tear down the hut?" Sorry. I am Jean Dan. I couldn't control myself. Shut up." "Oh." Chapter 161. Jean Dan Friar? What's so great about Jean Dan Friar? Just because you're a golden core cultivator, you can come here and destroy other people's houses? A series of complaints came from the thatched hut with a large hole in the roof. A gloomy Lu Chen was stepping on the broken pieces of the wooden table, trying hard to repair the hole in the roof. Far away from the door, beside the cave, the stone door was half open. Su Qingjun was standing by the door, looking a little guilty as she poked her head out to look at the thatched hut. Occasionally, she could hear the complaints that came with the wind, making her already pink cheeks even redder, revealing a soul-stirring beauty. She suddenly felt her face burning. She reached out and gently touched her cheeks, looking a little ashamed and guilty. But she didn't know why, but after a while she suddenly snickered to herself, probably thinking of something that even she found too funny. "Flipping the table? What are you flipping? If you have so much strength, why don't you chop down trees?" Listening to the man who seemed to be complaining gloomily, Su Qingjun leaned against the door, suddenly covered her mouth with her hand and giggled, then turned and walked in. The stone door closed behind her, and only her light footsteps could be seen faintly as she walked into the depths of the cave. The matter was finally settled. But strangely, in the next 2 or 3 days the Flying Goose Terrace was unexpectedly peaceful. No one came to disturb them. And the ripening of the eagle fruit also began to stabilize. Almost every day there would be 1 or 2 fruits ripening, and then Lu Qin would call Su Qingjun out to eat them. When the two met, they would chat, and their relationship seemed to become more familiar, occasionally joking. Such peaceful days made people feel unexpectedly comfortable, as if they were in a paradise. In the majestic Kunlun, in this vast world, the small Flying Goose Terrace seemed to be a small world for the two of them. In the middle of this, Masato Kihara came again, but at that time, Su Qingjuan's injuries had mostly recovered, and there seemed to be nothing wrong with her. After chatting for a while, Masato Kihara warned her a few things, and then left in a hurry. As for Lu Qin, whom he had a deep impression of before, Masato Kihara actually ignored him this time, which was a little strange. Because of this, Su Qingjun expressed a little doubt and puzzlement to Lu Qin, but Lu Qin was very narrow-minded and sharp and said, "Your master probably wants to forget the reward he promised me." Su Qingjun was angry and amused at the same time, and only said that it was impossible. But when Lu Qin was about to argue with her, she floated away and only said, "It's still early today, I'm going back to sleep, to practice. If you need anything, use the Burning Heart Talisman to call me." On the 9th day of Lu Qin's stay in the Flying Goose Terrace. This morning he got up as usual, looked at the newly repaired roof, touched the table that had been rebuilt with wood, and then went out to fetch water to wash his face. He looked at the rising sun, looked down at the sea of clouds, and walked around the Flying Goose Terrace, and then busied himself in the spiritual field. When the mountain wind blew over from the cliff, the old pine trees swayed slightly, and the leaves rustled. It felt like another beautiful and quiet day. Unfortunately, this peaceful and beautiful land did not last for too long. A sound from a distance broke the peace of the Flying Goose Terrace. Lu Qin stood up from the spiritual field, walked up the ridge and looked in the direction of the mountain road, and then sighed softly. On the mountain road, the 3 brothers Sumo, Su Qian and Su Wen were striding over. Lu Qin put down the things in his hands and looked down. He saw that his body, especially his trousers and shoes, were stained with black mud and dust, and there was a lot of it on his clothes. He did not look like a cultivator at all, and was obviously a tenant farmer. But it seemed that there was not much difference between a part-time disciple and a tenant farmer. Lu Qin muttered to himself, probably in a self-deprecating manner. Then he clapped his hands and walked over. He stopped in front of the 3 Su brothers with a smile on his face about 30 to 40 feet away from the cave. "Senior Su brothers, long time no see." He smiled and cupped his hands and said, "How come you have time to come here today?" When the 3 saw Lu Qin, except for Sumo who was standing in the middle, Su Qian and Su Wen all nodded, probably thinking that Lu Qin was now helping Su Qingjun. Although he was still far from the level of Su Qingjuan's confidence, he still had basic manners. But after a while, when they saw the black mud on Lu Qin's body and feet, the 3 of them immediately showed contempt and disgust, probably because they thought that Lu Qin was too dirty. "Yes." Su Wen casually responded, waved his hand as if he was shooing away flies and said, "We want to see Sister June, don't block the way." With that, the 3 of them prepared to walk forward, but they had only taken 2 steps when they suddenly found that Lu Qin was still standing in the same place, blocking their way. Although he still had a gentle smile on his face, he had no intention of giving way. Su Biao frowned and said, "What is the meaning of this?" Just as Lu Qin was about to speak, he heard Sumo say coldly, "Stinking brat, don't look for a beating." Lu Qin paused, his gaze lingering on Sumo's face for a moment, but his expression did not change. He still smiled warmly at the 3 of them and said, "3 young masters, it's like this. These 2 days, Shiji Su clearly told us that she wants to practice a secret technique, so she will not see anyone for the time being." The expressions of the 3 Su family brothers changed. Sumo seemed to have the worst temper, at least in front of an odd-job disciple like Lu Qin. She was the worst. She opened her mouth and scolded, "Bullshit. You said you will go into seclusion and you will not see her? Who do you think you are?" Lu Qin said, "My status is lowly, of course I cannot be compared to the 3 young masters Su. However, it is precisely because of this that I asked the 3 of you to think about it carefully. I am only an odd-job disciple. How would I dare to pretend to be the will of Shiji Su, and recklessly obstruct you?" When these words came out, Su Qian and Su Wen were both startled, and their originally angry expressions eased a little. Su Qian pulled the furious Sumo and said in a low voice, "What he said is somewhat reasonable. Maybe Sister June really has something to do, and it is temporarily inconvenient for her to see us. Before Sumo could speak, Suwin, who was at the side, already frowned and said, "Even if that is the case, we have already come. Don't tell me we are going to go back like this?" Su Qian said, "Otherwise, what do you want to do?" Sumo snorted and said, "How can I not know Sister June's temper? Everyone move aside, I will go over and knock on the door. If I do it a few more times, she will naturally come out to see us." Finished speaking, she casually walked forward. Lu Qin stood in the same place, and a trace of helplessness appeared on his face as he looked at Sumo. Sumo walked in front of him and looked at Lu Qin from head to toe. She sneered and said, "Stinking brat, I think you have eaten the heart of a bear and the guts of a leopard. I have already said things like this and you still dare to block my way?" Lu Qin smiled bitterly and said, "Young Master Su, with your status, I presume that you are also a reasonable person." Bang! Suddenly there was a muffled sound. It was Sumo who directly lifted her leg and kicked Lu Chen's lower abdomen. Immediately, Lu Chen was kicked to the ground and he even rolled a few times on the ground. Lu Chen curled up his body. Probably because he had been kicked quite hard, he even began to cough violently, and at the same time, gasped for breath. "Speak your mother's reason." Sumo sneered, "Who do you think you are? Do you think you are qualified to speak reason with me?" After cursing this sentence, he swaggered past Lu Chen. Su Qian and Su Wen followed up, and indifferently glanced at Lu Chen who was lying on the ground. Then they said to Sumo, How can you be so impulsive? In any case, this person is helping Sister June to plant trees. If you do this, it will not look good on Sister June," Sumo said indifferently. "Pay. A person with this kind of status dares to put on airs in front of us. Isn't that asking for a beating? So be it. So what if Sister June comes over? At most, she will only say a few words to us. It's not a big deal." "Oh, that's true." Su Qian and Su Wen both nodded in agreement. As they spoke, the three of them arrived at the stone door of the Abode of Immortals cave. They loudly knocked on the door and shouted, Sister June, come out for a moment. We have something to talk to you about." Lying on the ground, Lu Qin held his lower abdomen with both hands while looking at the stone door of the Abode of Immortals cave. After a while, only a rumbling sound could be heard. After a while, Su Qingjun expressionlessly walked out with a somewhat frosty temperament. It seemed that she was not in a good mood. The three brothers of the Su family simultaneously had the same feeling. However, they had long since become proficient in dealing with this sister. Immediately, they surrounded her and fought to be the first to speak. Su Qingjun listened with an indifferent expression. Her gaze passed over the three people surrounding her and saw Lu Qin, who had been beaten to the ground in front of her. She saw that his complexion was somewhat pale and that his hands were covering his abdomen. There was also a distinct footprint there. In the morning light, a shadow seemed to suddenly pass through her bright and clear eyes. She seemed to want to say something, to do something, but she slowly lowered her head. Lu Qin lay on the ground. His face did not have much of an expression. He only quietly looked at her. After a while, Su Qingjun suddenly ignored the three noisy brothers. She clenched her teeth and strode towards the thatched cottage in the distance. Not long after, she arrived in front of the thatched cottage. She pushed open the door and walked in. The three brothers of the Su family looked at each other in dismay. There was a puzzled expression on their faces. Lu Qin shook his head and sighed. He smiled bitterly and said in a low voice, "Why do you insist on going to my thatched cottage? I don't believe that there is no table in your cave residence." Bang! Suddenly, a loud sound came from the thatched cottage. Lu Qin and the three brothers of the Su family looked together. They saw a wooden table break out of the house, smashing a big hole in the roof of the thatched cottage. It flew up high and then fell down heavily. With a crackling sound, it was immediately smashed into pieces. After a while, Su Qingjun slowly walked out of the house. The expression on her face was somewhat strange. She seemed to be a little nervous, but strangely there was also some inexplicable excitement. Her hands were clenched into fists. If you looked closely, you could even see that her hands were faintly trembling. It seemed that she was very nervous and excited. She fixed her gaze on Sumo and the others. Then she slowly walked over. Sumo laughed heartily and greeted her. She laughed loudly and said, Sister June, I know that you are still the best to me. Just now, this blind servant tried to stop me and did not let me see you. I kicked him away. See, you are still the best to me." Before he finished speaking, Su Qingjun had already walked in front of him. Suddenly, her eyes shone with a strange light. She seemed excited and agitated. Her eyes were surging violently like the waves of the sea. Just as Sumo danced and ran over, the woman suddenly lifted her foot. It was as if the scene just now was replaying in an instant. Su Qingjun kicked Sumo's stomach. Then there was a scream like a pig being slaughtered. Sumo's whole body was kicked up into the air. With a bang, she was kicked directly onto the hard mountain wall. At the same time, accompanied by a few clear sounds of bones breaking, she rolled down. The wind blew over Yantai Mountain. It was silent in an instant. Everyone held their breath, dumbstruck. Chapter 162. Lu Chen laid on the ground and laid his body flat. Looking at the sky, he saw that it was an azure blue, so clear that it was almost transparent. Then he smiled slightly. Not far from him, Sumo was sent flying by Su Qingjuan's kick. After rolling down the hard stone wall, she seemed to have lost her mind in an instant. Not only had her eyes turned white, her hands were waving randomly, as if trying to grab onto some illusory life-saving straw. Her mouth was also muttering some gibberish that no one could understand. On the other side, Su Qian and Su Wen were completely scared silly. They stood motionless on the spot, staring at Su Qingjun with wide eyes, as if they had seen the most terrifying and inconceivable thing in their lives. After a long while, Su Qian stammered, Jun, Sister Jun, you, why did you kick Sumo? Su Qingjun turned around and looked at Su Qian. Her gaze was so cold that it was as if a basin of ice water had been poured on Su Qian's head. In an instant, the chill seeped into his bones, causing Su Qian to swallow back the words he was about to say. His forehead was also covered in cold sweat. Su Qingjun walked in front of Su Qian and Su Wen, looking at them expressionlessly. She asked indifferently, "Do you have any dissatisfaction?" These 5 words were not spoken quickly. Every word was heard clearly, but for some reason Su Qian only felt a chill run down his spine. Under Su Qingjuan's cold gaze, he subconsciously shook his head. Who knew that at this moment Su Wen, who was standing beside him, might have not been directly stared at by Su Qingjuan's strange gaze. He actually still had some courage left and said in a low voice, "Sister Jun, how can you be like this? You can't hit us, Pa." A crisp sound rang out. Su Qian clearly saw that fair and beautiful palm suddenly swing up, and a slap landed on Su Wen's face. Su Wen floated backwards, clutching his face and howling in pain as he fell to the ground, rolling several times. Lu Qin, who was lying on the ground, noticed another strange detail. After Su Qingjun slapped him to her heart's content, she suddenly clenched her fists and bit her red lips with her pearly white teeth. Her breathing was slightly rapid and she even panted a few times. She seemed to have relaxed after a moment of nervousness. After taking a deep breath, Su Qingjun looked at Su Qian again and asked softly, "Can I hit you?" Su Qian's face was drained of all color. With a pu sound he directly knelt down stammering, Yes. Sister Jun, please spare my life." Su Qian and Su Wen, who had crawled up from the ground, were also scared out of their wits. The two of them dragged the unconscious Sumo, who was already foaming at the mouth, and ran in a sorry state up the mountain path. Su Qingjun watched the 3 figures disappear into the distance. She was silent for a long time, the expression on her face fluctuating. Her chest heaved up and down, as if there were all kinds of intense emotions surging in her heart. She couldn't calm them down for a long time. After a while, she silently turned around and walked to the side of Lu Qin, who was still lying on the ground. She glanced at him and asked, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. I was kicked in the stomach. Look, there are footprints on this shirt." Lu Qin pointed at the footprint left by Sumo and said to Su Qingjun. When Su Qingjun saw his expression and tone of voice, the trace of worry on her face finally dissipated. She couldn't help but laugh. However, she felt that it was somewhat inappropriate to look down on Lu Qin like this, so she simply squatted down. She placed her hands on her knees and propped her chin up. There was a somewhat strange smile on her face, as if she wanted to open her mouth to ask something, but was somewhat hesitant. Unknowingly she was lost in thought. After a while, she suddenly called out to Lu Qin. "What?" Lu Qin lay on the ground and glanced at the beautiful girl squatting beside him. Su Qingjun laughed before saying anything. Then, her cheeks slightly reddened, but she seemed to be secretly delighted. She said to him, Did I look very impressive just now?" Lu Qin nodded his head heavily and sternly said, "Extremely impressive." Su Qingjun sighed and looked at her palm. She said, "That feeling just now. How do I put it, it was very strange." "Tell me about it." "There was clearly a voice in my heart that kept telling me that I shouldn't hit him, but after I really kicked him like that, my heart suddenly felt very, very comfortable. Lucien looked at her with a smile and said, "Do you feel that the things that were pressing on your heart in the past suddenly disappeared?" Su Qingjun took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, even my body feels much more relaxed." After a pause, she suddenly raised her hand and waved it in the air. There was a trace of yearning on her face. She softly said to herself, "I really want to hit him again." Lucien was startled. He turned over and sat up. "It's fine if you just let it out for a while. How can it be so exaggerated?" Su Qingjun pursed her lips and laughed. She said, "I'm just saying it casually. But I really didn't expect that your method would actually. She was momentarily at a loss for words, as if she couldn't think of a particularly good way to describe it. Lucien waved his hand and said, "Don't think about it. It's fine as long as it's useful." Su Qingjun hugged her knees. She looked like a girl who had returned to her childhood. She giggled, and her face exuded a bright radiance with an unusually beautiful joy. "Will there be trouble later?" Lucien climbed up from the ground and patted the dust off his body. Su Qingjun thought for a moment and said, "There should be. The three of them have been spoiled since they were young. When they return they will definitely complain." Lucien said, "Then have you thought about how to deal with it?" Su Qingjun shrugged. She seemed a little mischievous and a little lazy. She said indifferently, "Who cares? We'll see when the time comes." Oh. It was unknown whether the news of Su Qingjun's sudden outburst and beating up the three Su family brothers unexpectedly spread. In the following days the Flying Goose Terrace was abnormally quiet. No one came to disturb them. Lucien sighed and gloomily went to repair the roof of the thatched hut. Then he went to the forest behind the Flying Goose Terrace to cut a few pieces of wood to build a table. But this time he simply put the table outside the door. Su Qingjun came over and saw it. She was very surprised and asked him why he did this. Lucien said seriously, "In the future you can flip the table if you want. You're the Jindan and you're the boss. But don't ever tear down my house again. I only have a broken thatched hut here. It can't withstand any more trouble." At that moment Su Qingjun's face turned red. She looked like a messy white flower with a hint of red in the wind. She was very angry and complained to Lucien for a long time, but he refused. She complained that the table was extremely ugly, poorly made, and unsightly. If someone saw it outside and this matter was leaked, she would lose face in the mountains of Kunlun. Coincidentally, there was an eagle fruit that had ripened. The two walked to the spiritual field. Su Qingjun directly threw it into her mouth and ate it. When her mouth was still bulging, she grabbed Lucien and refused to let him go. She said angrily, "Wait here." Lucien had no choice but to wait for her. He sat on the ridge of the field and watched the scenery. When the wind blew over the cliff, he suddenly found that the cliff rocks seemed to be covered with beautiful wildflowers overnight. Later, after Su Qingjun catalyzed the medicine, she stared at him and used both carrot and stick tactics to persuade him. In the end, Lucien was pestered by her. Seeing that dusk was coming, he could only say, "Then you can't casually tear down my house in the future." Su Qingjun repeatedly waved her hand and said with a smile that she wouldn't tear it down. Lucien looked at her suspiciously and said, "Do you keep your word?" Su Qingjun said, "Of course I keep my word. You must believe me." Lucien said, "Of course I believe you." Then he shook his head and sighed. He moved the ugly and crudely made table back and put it back in the thatched hut. Su Qingjun immediately became happy. She was in a good mood as she strolled around the Flying Goose platform. That fiery red feather shawl shone brightly on her shoulders, setting off her beautiful face. When the sun set, she even jokingly said to Lucien that if she knew that it would be so peaceful now, she would have fought earlier. To this, Lucien naturally did not comment. He only smiled and did not speak. Such relaxed and happy days passed by quickly. In the blink of an eye, more than 20 days had passed. The eagle fruit on the Flying Goose platform had already been eaten. Su Qingjun's cultivation in the Jindan realm had finally completely eliminated all the hidden dangers and flaws and completely stabilized. Then Lucien was about to leave. That day he personally plucked the last ripe eagle fruit and handed it to Su Qingjun, who was standing at the side. He smiled and congratulated her. Then he turned and went to his thatched hut to pack his luggage. Su Qingjun held the last fruit and seemed a little emotional. She quietly stared at the fruit in her palm. After a long while she slowly ate it. When he went down the mountain, Su Qingjun came over to send him off. It was when the sun was setting. The light shone on the boundless sea of clouds. Rays of golden light shone down, elongating their shadows. The two smiled at each other and waved goodbye. Before he left, Su Qingjun called out to him again. If you need my help in the future, you can come to me. Lu Chen smiled. That good? Su Qingjun smiled. Yes. I still owe you a lot of favors. Lu Chen laughed. He nodded to her. He then strode down the mountain path. When he was about to turn a corner, he looked back. In the distance, on the other side of the Flying Goose platform, the beautiful figure was still standing there under the setting sun. Then she seemed to see him looking back. She stretched out an arm and waved at him from afar. At that moment, the sunset filled the sky. It was as beautiful as a burning fire. Chapter 163. The 30 feet peak of Kunlun Mountain. This was a mountain peak in the towering Kunlun mountain range. Its name was rather peculiar, but the mountain itself was not only 30 feet high. The mountain that was only 30 feet high was called a mound. There were several explanations for the origin of this mountain's name, but the most well-known one was that there was a clear spring at the top of the mountain. The water vapor was rising, and whenever the sun shone down, a 30-feet rainbow would appear on the mountain peak. This was why the mountain was named 30 feet. In the middle of the 30-feet peak there was a spiritual cave. The cave door was tightly shut, and a layer of fallen leaves had fallen at the door. Dust was everywhere, and it seemed that it had been closed for a long time. However, on this day there were many people standing near and far outside the cave. Among them there were two women, one old and one young. They were Jean Dan Fryer, Melaleuca japonica, and EXN. At the same time, from the 30-feet peak, a strange whistling sound could be heard from time to time. It was like the roar of a dragon or the howl of a hurricane. It was as if there was a mysterious principle that resonated with the heavens and the earth, resonating with the mountains and rivers. It made people feel as if there was a giant beast that was about to awaken from its slumber. An inexplicable but incomparably abundant power seemed to be contained in this mountain. Like a butterfly that was about to break out of its cocoon, it slowly flapped its wings and whistled. EXIN's face was full of worry. Her eyes stared unblinkingly at the tightly shut stone door of the cave. Her hand tightly grasped Melaleuca japonica's hand, and she seemed to be so nervous that it was difficult for her to even breathe. As for Melaleuca japonica, although her expression was relatively calm, there was a trace of hidden anxiety in her eyes. Like this, they waited outside the cave for a full 2 hours. However, there was no further change in the cave. Instead, even the strange roar of the dragon and tiger had slowly subsided. The various people on the 30-feet peak showed a trace of disappointment on their faces. Some people had already begun to turn around and leave. EXN, who was standing at the very front, turned pale and her hands and feet went cold. Melaleuca japonica seemed to feel something and sighed softly. She held EXIN's little hand and hugged her gently. She said softly, "It's okay. Don't worry." EXIN's eyes were misty and she looked sad. Even her voice seemed to be choking with sobs as she said, "Martial uncle, why hasn't master come out?" Melaleuca japonica shook her head and said softly, "Silly child, the Yuanying state is a huge life and death trial. It's not that easy to pass. Don't be too anxious." EXN bit her lip and said, "But you clearly said that the tiger and dragon sound is a sign of a breakthrough." Melaleuca japonica nodded and said, "That is indeed the case, and the sound of dragons and tigers is an auspicious sign." EXN smiled bitterly and said, "But for 7 consecutive days, it sounded every day and then fell silent again. Why is this?" Melaleuca japonica slowly shook her head and said, "When breaking through to the Yuanying state, there are thousands of illusions. It's difficult to see all of them. Moreover, the person breaking through the realm is different. Their techniques are different, their cultivation is different, and their state of mind is different. There are all kinds of subtle differences in the signs." She gently stroked EXIN's soft black hair and said gently, "Good girl, we can only wait patiently and hope that your master is a good person." EXN nodded blankly, but the worry on her face still lingered. Her bright eyes only stared at the cave. Melaleuca japonica sighed in her heart and turned to look at the surroundings. After the tiger and dragon sound weakened, more than half of the surrounding onlookers had dispersed. Only a few people were still standing far away and looking in their direction. Suddenly, her eyes narrowed slightly. She saw a young man standing under an old pine tree in the distance. Was he? Melaleuca japonica frowned slightly, obviously not expecting He to come here. He also quickly noticed Melaleuca japonica's gaze. After looking in their direction, he smiled at Melaleuca japonica. His expression was somewhat respectful, obviously expressing that he had no ill intentions. Melaleuca Japonica hesitated for a moment, then nodded slightly at him. In any case, he was a talented disciple with a bright future. What happened a few days ago in fact really had nothing to do with him. Melaleuca Japonica herself actually didn't have any deep hatred with He. She just didn't know why he was guarding the entrance of Dongfang Tao's cave. What did he want to do? Yen Luo slowly turned her head and looked at the cave, only to hear that the sounds of dragons and tigers in the cave were getting softer and softer, and finally could not be heard anymore. Kunwa City, Black Hill Pavilion. Ping ping pang pang, pai li pa la. A series of strange noises rang out. In the courtyard, Old Ma was dumbstruck as he watched Lu Chen throw all the dishes he brought to go with wine, such as fried peanuts, pickled radishes, salted duck eggs and so on, into the garbage basket. He shouted in astonishment, "What are you doing?" Lu Chen looked at this fatty with contempt. His eyes were filled with the superiority of a nouveau riche. Then he leisurely took out plate after plate of delicacies from the bag he carried with him. In the blink of an eye, the small dining table between them was filled with delicacies, and he even patted several layers of them. Old Ma's mouth was wide open. While drooling, he cried out in alarm, "Damn! You brat, you're not a spy anymore but a bandit. How many restaurants in Kunwa City did you rob?" "Rob my ass," Lu Chen said proudly, "I bought all of these." Old Ma stared at him as if he had seen a ghost. He stammered, You bought them?" Lu Chen snorted coldly. It seemed he didn't want to answer this retarded fatty's question. He reached out to grab the jug of wine the fatty was holding and casually threw it away. "Ah!" Old Ma screamed in pain. "That's the good wine I specially left. 1 jug of good wine for 1 spirit stone." Bang! A muffled sound interrupted the fatty's wailing. In a heroic manner, Lu Chen placed a jug of old wine in front of Old Ma. He squinted at him and said, 50 spirit stones for 1 jug of Huadiao wine. Which one do you want to drink?" Old Ma was dumbstruck. His eyes widened. A moment later he shouted, "F*ck this broken wine. I want to drink Huadiao wine. Good wine. Good wine." Old Ma happily took a big gulp and clicked his tongue. Then, he impatiently reached out and tore off a leg meat from an unknown immortal bird or spiritual beast from the mountain of delicacies on the table. With his mouth full of oil, he chewed with a satisfied expression on his face. Lu Chen looked much more refined. He sat across from Old Ma and drank wine. He picked up a piece of food with his chopsticks and said with a smile, "What do you think? I'm a good friend, aren't I? I remember all the good things I get from you. Good brother, dog friend." Old Ma raised the bird leg in his hand and gestured to him. Lu Chen was furious and cursed, "F*ck you. I bought you so many delicious food and drinks, but you actually called me a dog?" Old Ma was shocked. He quickly swallowed the big piece of meat in his mouth and said with a smile, Wrong. You heard wrong. I said good friend." He gave Lu Chen a thumbs up and said seriously, "In the whole world I think you are the best friend. Good brother." "That's more like it." Lu Chen angrily glared at him again. Then he picked up the wine bowl and drank a mouthful of wine. Old Ma looked at him with a smile and then asked carefully, "I say, Lu Chen, you suddenly became so rich. What happened?" Lu Chen snorted and said, "I earned it with my own ability." Old Ma raised his eyebrows and said, "Tell me about it. Damn it. How could there be such a good thing in Kunlun? If I had known, I would have gone in myself." Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "It's not a big deal." Then he roughly told him what happened with Su Qingjun these days. Old Ma's eyes opened wider and wider as he listened. The way he looked at Lu Chen also became more and more strange. In the end, when Lu Chen finished, Old Ma frowned and said, "I say, why do I feel that your money is a bit like you are living off a woman?" Bullsh*t. Lu Chen flew into a rage and kicked him. He said, "Damn fatty, spit out what you just ate." Don't. Old Ma laughed heartily and dodged, saying, "This money is too good, too good. It's all because of your cleverness and resourcefulness." Lu Chen scolded him a few more times and then sat down. Old Ma smiled and sat beside him. After thinking carefully for a while, his face became more serious and he asked him softly, "So, you and Su Qingjun have also stayed on the same mountain for more than 20 days. How about it? Do you think Su Qingjun is still a suspect?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then slowly shook his head and said, "I think she should not be a big suspect." Old Ma squinted his eyes slightly and said, "Oh, so sure?" Lu Chen picked up the wine bowl but did not drink it. He only rotated it gently in his palm and lightly said, Su Qingjun, this girl on the outside looks perfect and flawless. Talented, good family background, diligent in training and amazing skills. But after getting along with her for a long time, it is very easy to find a big flaw in her character. He smiled and said, if the evil sect has handed over the fate of the entire sect to such a person, then we have nothing to be afraid of. We just have to sit here and wait. I think the evil sect will not have more than a few days of fate. Old Ma nodded his head and said, that makes sense. Lu Qin stared at the bowl of wine in his hand. He watched the transparent and slightly yellow wine gently swaying. After a while he suddenly said, Old Ma, do you think I am a cruel person? Old Ma was stunned for a moment. He frowned and said, everything is fine, why do you say that? Lu Chen's lips twitched slightly, his eyes lowered and glimmered. After a while he said, when I discovered Su Qingjuan's weakness in that moment I suddenly discovered that I had already thought of 7 or 8 ways I can coerce her friends and relatives, I can assassinate her, I can even force her to go crazy. The courtyard was so quiet that even the sound of a pin dropping on the ground could be heard. He slowly raised his head and looked at Old Ma. He quietly said, all of these things I have not thought about it in detail. But like instinct in that instant, I had the thought of harming someone. Chapter 164. Old Ma also became silent, looked at Lu Qin for a while, took the jar of wine and poured himself a full bowl. Come, have a sip. He gently raised the bowl in front of him. Lu Qin nodded, picked up the bowl in his hand and clinked it with him. I think both of us are not good people. Old Ma smiled, then said, your hands are stained with a lot of blood, I have also killed people. But what can we do, you and I are both walking this path, can we still turn back? Lu Qin made a sound of N, and did not speak. Old Ma drank another mouthful of wine, then lightly said, as for being cruel or not, it is actually meaningless. Could it be that after you stop being cruel, others will not kill you? Those evil sect remnants who have been wanting to grind your bones and scatter your ashes for the past 10 years will let you go? Lu Qin smiled and said, you are too good at comforting people. Old Ma also laughed, then looked at Lu Qin meaningfully and said, I feel that you seem a little strange. What do you mean? Old Ma said, you never asked this question in the past. Killing is killing. You don't even blink. That's the original you. But I found that ever since you went up to Kunlun Mountain, there seems to be something strange about you. He leaned his fat body forward, lowered his voice, a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes, looked at Lu Qin with a smile that was not a smile and said, why, found your conscience? Want to be a good person? Lu Chen's eyes slightly narrowed, after a moment he suddenly laughed and scolded, damn good person, I your father specialize in killing good people. Saying that, he turned his hand and directly smashed the wine bowl towards Old Ma's head. Old Ma laughed, retracted his head, then smiled and waved his hand, said, don't think of touching me, I am not a good person. We have done that kind of thing all our lives, don't let your imagination run wild, don't you think? Lu Qin laughed, then looked up at the sky. Above the square courtyard, there was a small square of blue sky, as if it was the whole world in his eyes. So, he laughed even more happily, even to the point of coughing in the end, closing his eyes. By the way, there is one more thing I want to tell you, Old Ma said carelessly. Lu Qin nodded and said, and what is it? I received some news that recently, someone in the city seems to be secretly searching for Cinnabar. Lu Chen's hand paused for a moment. He glanced at Old Ma and asked calmly, who is it? I still don't know. It is said that the person who did this is also very careful. He often changes his appearance so that others can't recognize him. In addition, there are so many shops in Kunwa City and so many cultivators come and go, so it is very difficult to find him. Lu Qin frowned and said, then how did you know? Old Ma smiled and said, recently people in several big shops have been asked about these things. In addition to inquiring about the quantity of cinnabar sold, those people also asked about the identity and origin of the people who bought large quantities of cinnabar. Lu Qin slightly raised his eyebrows and said in a deep voice, would those shops casually tell others about this? Of course not, ordinary people. Old Ma said, however, when the shopkeepers of a few shops spread the news, they revealed that they should have seen the tokens of the Kunlun party. You know, in Kunwa City, no one dares to not give face to the Kunlun party. Lu Qin frowned and said, the Kunlun party? Old Ma said indifferently, I think it's most likely because some evildoer of the devil cult went too far on the mountain some time ago and attracted the attention of famous sections. Lu Qin smiled and said, can they find you? Old Ma took a sip of wine from his bowl and said, they can't. Lucien looked at him and said, "How can you be so sure? Kunwa City is the territory of the Kunlun party. Nothing can be hidden from them here." Old Ma sneered and said, "You're right, but I didn't buy cinnabar in Kunwa City. You can't catch me, can you?" Lucien was stunned for a moment. A moment later, his eyes revealed a trace of understanding and he said, Could it be that you went out of town to buy it?" Old Ma sighed and said, "People like me who do dirty work besides cleaning up after you people all day, always have to think of ways to live longer." Lucien couldn't help laughing. He reached out and patted Old Ma's shoulder and said, "Come on, I know you're the best in this business. Otherwise, I wouldn't feel at ease putting my life in your hands. Get lost." Old Ma reprimanded him without any trace of politeness. "Can you find out who did this?" Lucien asked Old Ma. Old Ma frowned and said, "Is it necessary? In any case, it's definitely someone from the Kunlun party." Lucien said, "In any case, I still want to know who's secretly dealing with us. Even if it's to make myself more confident, we might have a chance to meet again in the future on Mount Kunlun." Old Ma narrowed his eyes and said with a faint smile, "What do you want to do when we meet?" "Nothing. What else can I do?" Lucien spread his hands, looking harmless to both humans and animals. Old Ma clicked his tongue and immediately nodded. "Fine, I'll go check, but it won't be that fast. We still have to be cautious about these things." "I know, there's no hurry." After coming out of the Black Hill Pavilion and leaving the secluded alley, he walked 2 more streets before his eyes suddenly became lively. There were many shops on both sides of the long street and cultivators coming and going were like carps crossing the river. At a glance, it seemed like people from all over the world could be seen. Lucien quietly walked on the lively street. The people around him passed by one. The noise, laughter, curses, and all the other lively sounds seemed to be automatically separated from him by a small distance. It was difficult to get close and they were isolated from each other. It was as if he was always standing outside of this hustle and bustle. Even if he was actually in it, he could not really integrate into it. He walked slowly, and there was always a sense of loneliness that followed him like a shadow. This feeling was not good. Most of the time it would always make people depressed. Even people who had long been used to it would not like it. Until he suddenly saw a familiar figure in front of him. For some reason he suddenly wanted to chat with someone, so he smiled and caught up to her, calling out, "EXN." The woman in front of him was startled and looked back. After seeing that it was Lucien, she breathed a sigh of relief, and a smile appeared on her originally somewhat worried face. She said, "Brother Lu, it's you." Lucien said with a smile, "How come you're here?" EXN said, "Something happened at home, so I came back for a while. I'm on my way back to the mountain now. Brother Lu, what about you? Seeing that you actually have time to come to Kunwa City today, could it be that you've already finished your business on Sister Sue's side?" Lucien said, "That's right. You actually don't know?" EXN sighed and said, I haven't been in the mood to think about anything else lately, so I've been paying attention to my master." She then roughly told Lucien about the situation on 30 Feet Peak. Lucien nodded and said, "No wonder I haven't seen you these past few days. But if there's a strange sign with your master, he might come out of his closed-door meditation at any time. Why do you still dare to go down the mountain?" EXIN's expression became a bit more unsightly, and with a bit of worry she said with a bitter smile, "Since yesterday, there hasn't been any sound from the Immortals' cave on 30 Feet Peak. I am also very worried about my master, but Martial Uncle Melaleuca Japonica said there won't be any news for the time being, so I have to slowly wait. She told me to take this opportunity to go down the mountain and take a look." For a moment, Lucien also didn't know what to say, so he could only comfort her. "Alright, you don't need to worry too much. Your Martial Uncle Yan's experience is 100 times better than ours. Since she's not worried, presumably nothing serious has happened for the time being." EXN nodded lightly and said, "Brother Lu, do you still want to stroll around in this city? I'm still worried about my master, so I'll go back to the mountain first." Lucien said, "Let's go together. In any case, I don't have anything else to do." EXN said, and her expression seemed to soften a bit. The two of them turned around and walked away. Just as they were about to walk out of the bustling long street, they suddenly saw a group of people walking in front of them. The way they walked looked a bit arrogant and despotic, swaggering as if they didn't put the people around them in their eyes. Lucien glanced ahead and frowned slightly. Just as he was about to pull EXIN to the side to make way, someone in front of them suddenly saw them. Someone immediately cried out in alarm, and then someone pointed at Lucien and cursed. Suddenly 7 or 8 people came over, surrounding Lu Qin and Exin in the middle. Exin was stunned, but then she immediately recognized the people in front of her. In a loud voice she said, "Su Qian, Su Wen, what do you want?" Those people were members of the Su family, led by Su Qian and Su Wen. As for Sumo, she didn't see her. Perhaps it was because she was beaten too hard by Su Qingjun that day that her injuries still hadn't healed. Su Qian glanced at Exin with a slightly surprised expression. He then coldly snorted and said, "So it's you, little girl from the E family." In Kunwa City, the Su family was far more powerful than the E family. Usually Su Qian, Su Wen, and Sumo didn't treat Exin well. But no matter what, the two families were considered neighbors in the same city. Occasionally the Su family would go to the E family to ask for tea, so they were always polite. At this moment, Su Qian also waved his hand and shouted, "Pull her away." From the side someone rushed over. One person stopped Exin while the other 4 or 5 people grabbed Lu Qin. Lu Qin didn't fight back. From the beginning he had a faint smile on his face. He indifferently looked at Su Qian and Su Wen. At this moment he even smiled and said, "What? Young Master Su, do you want to vent your anger on me?" Su Qian walked over with a sneer on his face. He looked at Lu Qin with disdain and reached out his hand to slap Lu Qin's face. He sneered and said, "What? You're not convinced?" Lu Qin slightly narrowed his eyes, and a dark shadow flashed in the depths of his eyes. Chapter 165. Bah. Su Wen said angrily, "Who do you think you are? It must be you who provoked Sister June all day long, making her angry at us. If we don't teach you a lesson, you're going to overturn the heavens." Su Qian sneered and said, "Brother Mo has long wanted to vent his anger on this guy. Capture him for me and let Brother Mo teach him a good lesson." Su Wen laughed loudly. He walked over and suddenly raised his foot, kicking Lu Qin's thigh. He grinned hideously and said, "Go on and shout. Go on and drag him. Let's see if anyone will stand up for you today." "Hey, what are you doing?" Exin, who was at the side, shouted loudly with a frightened and angry expression. However, the people of the Su family didn't pay attention to her and directly pushed her to the side. Then a large group of people escorted Lu Qin, pushing and hitting him all the way to the Su family's mansion. Exin was so anxious that she stomped her feet. She wanted to save him, but she didn't know what to do. If she went home and called for help, the E family couldn't compare to the Su family, so they certainly didn't want to offend the people of the Su family. If she went back to the mountain, Lu Qin was just an ordinary part-time disciple. No one would be willing to stand up for him. After thinking it over, Exin suddenly clenched her teeth and ran in the direction of Mount Kunlun. At this time she could only beg the elders she knew. She hoped that Martial Uncle Melaleuca Japonica would be merciful and come down the mountain to save Lu Qin for the sake of her usual love for him. But would there really be people who would be willing to offend the wealthy and powerful Su clan in Kunwa City for the sake of an insignificant part-time disciple? Moreover, the Su clan had a genius born in their clan and was destined to be prosperous for many years to come. Even if it was Jean Dan Friar of the Kunlun party? Exin did not dare to think about these things, because she was afraid that if she thought about it carefully, she would not even have the courage to run to Kunlun Mountain. "Brother Lu, wait for me. I'll definitely find someone to save you." There were tears of anxiety in the corner of the girl's eyes, and she desperately ran towards Kunlun Mountain. In Kunwa City, the Su family's residence was also a famous luxurious courtyard. After all, it had been flourishing for many years. It was located in a good location and was very eye-catching. Therefore, when a group of people walked back with a person in custody, it immediately attracted the attention of many passers-by. Of course, the Su residence's main gate was also very imposing, and there was even a special gatehouse next to it. At this moment, when they heard the commotion, several servants and guards ran out. When they saw the commotion, they were immediately dumbfounded and looked at each other in dismay. Not long after, Su Qian, Su Wen, and the others brought Lu Qin to the main entrance and were about to enter without a care in the world. The guards at the side pushed and shoved each other. Finally, an old man who looked a bit old walked up and said with a bitter smile, "Young masters, what are you doing?" Su Qian snorted and said, "Old Li, us 2 brothers caught a thief on the road, so we brought him back to teach him a good lesson." Old Li glanced at Lu Qin in the crowd, and his complexion slightly changed. He forced a smile and said in a low voice, "Young master, what he's wearing inside is the Kunlun party's disciple uniform, right?" Su Qian frowned and turned his head to take a look. Sure enough, he saw that Lu Chen's coat was only an ordinary piece of clothing, but after the pushing and shoving just now, the clothes underneath were revealed. It was precisely the Kunlun party's disciple uniform. Su Qian was somewhat hesitant. After all, this was Kunwa City. If he wanted to casually punish a Kunlun disciple, it wouldn't look too good, even if it was only an insignificant odd-job disciple. However, at this moment, Su Wen, who was standing to the side, sneered and suddenly raised his voice, saying, "Who saw it? Who saw it?" As he said this, he walked over and pulled Lu Chen's clothes tightly, covering the disciple uniform. He sneered at Lu Chen and said, "Stinking brat, you'll die today." From the beginning until now, Lu Chen still didn't have any intention of resisting. He just stood in the same place and indifferently looked at Su Wen. After a moment, he suddenly grinned. Su Wen suddenly felt that the smile was exceptionally dazzling, and he angrily said, "Bring him in. Damn it, when I ruthlessly punish you, if you can still smile, I'll change my surname to yours." Old Li, who was standing to the side, repeatedly shook his head. He was an old and experienced man, so how could he not see that there was something fishy going on? However, he also knew that these young masters of his family were used to being domineering, and they weren't people he could persuade. Thus, the group of people just passed by and casually entered the Su residence. The people in the gatehouse could do nothing about it. Old Li frowned and sighed, oh no, something bad is going to happen." Someone from the side came over and asked in a low voice, "Uncle Li, what should we do now?" Before Old Li could speak, another servant said, "Old master is out and not at home. How about I go and report to madam?" "Shut up," Old Li said unhappily. "These two young masters and young master Sumo, madam usually spoils them the most. If you go over and say something bad, do you believe that the three young masters will come over and break your legs before chasing you out of the house?" That servant immediately became silent out of fear, and the people at the side were also at a loss. Someone said, "Then we don't care." Old Li let out a long sigh and stamped his feet, saying, "Forget it, we are just servants anyway, how can we care so much?" All the servants nodded in agreement, but when they looked at the back of the group of people in the depths of the Su residence, their eyes revealed a bit of sympathy. On this day, Kunlun Mountain was sunny, and there were many disciples going up and down the mountain. Most of them had a relaxed expression, so when a young girl hurriedly rushed up the mountain path and ran forward with all her might, it was especially eye-catching. Many people saw the figure of Exan rushing over, and most of them took the initiative to make a path for her. Occasionally there were people who knew her and would ask a question, but Exan often did not have the time to answer, and only ran forward with an anxious face. Many people looked at her back in disgust. Later it was unknown who said it, but then many people knew that the young girl was the girl who had caused a stir in the Kunlun party in the incident of Gang forcing a marriage. So much so that even the faint scar on Exan's cheek was picked up and talked about. But these gossips, Exan did not care. She ran all the way and only felt that the mountain path was unusually long, so long that she started to hate herself for being too weak. Why couldn't she be like some cultivators like Jindan Friar and Yuanying, who had magical powers and could fly in the air? No matter how long the road was, she could still reach it in the blink of an eye. After such a long time, would Brother Lu have met with an accident? He wouldn't be injured, right? Those abominable Su family people, would they do something to him? Exan felt that she was so anxious that she was about to cry. Finally, when her eyes were about to blur, she saw the shadow of Melaleuca japonica in the main hall of the flowing fragrance garden. There was someone in the quiet room. Exan did not even think and directly rushed in. The usual rules and etiquette were all thrown to the nine heavens. In a moment, the door made a heavy and ear-piercing sound. There were two people in the room sitting facing each other and talking. One of them was Melaleuca japonica. At this moment, she turned her head and stood up in shock, looked at Exan and said, "You, what happened to you?" Martial Ant, I beg you to help me, you must help me." Exan with a sobbing tone rushed over, grabbed Melaleuca japonica's arm, shook it and said. Melaleuca japonica misunderstood. She sighed and gently stroked Exan's hair. With a kind expression on her face she said, "Ai, good child, don't be too anxious. Didn't I tell you earlier that your master indeed has difficulties in making the breakthrough, but it's still too early to say that he will fail. We still need to wait patiently for a while, so don't worry too much." Exan repeatedly shook her head and said, No, Martial Ant, I have a friend who ran into trouble in Kunwa City and was taken away. You help me go save him." Melaleuca japonica was startled, then she immediately frowned and said, "What exactly happened? Tell me clearly." Although Exan was anxious, she still had to tell her, so she roughly told her what happened on the street in Kunwa City. In the end, she said anxiously, "Martial Aunt, big brother Lu Chen was taken to the Su family. Quickly go save him." Lu Chen? The Su family? At this time, a slightly surprised voice suddenly came from the side. Exan turned to look and was suddenly startled. She saw that the other person sitting across from Melaleuca japonica was actually Su Qingjun. When she came in just now, she was too anxious so she didn't notice her. Now she was also stunned. Looking at Su Qingjun's surprised expression, she didn't know what to say. After a long time, she awkwardly called out, "Younger sister Su." Su Qingjun's expression didn't look too good. She said gloomily, "Younger sister Exan who took Lu Chen away?" Exan secretly glanced at her. After a moment of hesitation, she said in a low voice, "It was Su Qian and Su Wen. They brought 7 or 8 people. Brother Lu didn't even have time to fight back before he was taken away by them." Anger flashed across Su Qingjun's face, but she quickly suppressed it. She turned to Melaleuca japonica and said, "Martial Aunt Yen, in short, thank you very much for the eagle fruit. In the future, Qingjun will definitely repay you. I have something to do today, so I will take my leave first." Melaleuca japonica nodded and said, It's just a small matter. It's not worth mentioning. You don't need to take it to heart. Go." Su Qingjun bowed, turned around, and strode out. When she passed by Exin, her gaze swept over Exin's anxious face. Her footsteps paused for a moment, then she said in a soft voice, "Younger sister, don't worry. Lu Chen he should be fine." As she spoke, she shook her head lightly and left. Exin was at a loss. After a moment, she suddenly became anxious again. She ran to Melaleuca japonica's side and said, Martial Aunt, can you help me? Go and save him?" Melaleuca japonica looked at Exin and said, "Who is Lu Chen to you? Why are you so anxious for him?" Exin was stunned for a moment, then she said perfunctorily, "He's my friend. I am Martial Aunt, don't ask any more. Quickly go and save him. Otherwise, something bad will really happen if we're late." Melaleuca japonica snorted and turned around to sit down. She said, "He's just a servant disciple. You want me to offend the Su family for him? How can you do that?" Exin was stunned. For a moment she couldn't speak. However, at the corner of her eyes, there were a few sparkling tears. Chapter 166. All of you must die. He had even imagined that one day when his big brother achieved success and fame and achieved the great undertaking of enlightened Yuanying, he would marry Su Qingjun, who was also known as a genius. Even when Gang was at his most glorious and high-spirited, he never dared to imagine that he could develop a relationship with a woman like Su Qingjun. In his mind, only his most respected big brother, He, was worthy of such a fairy-like woman. However, he finally restrained himself because he still had a heavy responsibility. He still hadn't completed the task his big brother entrusted to him, so he couldn't delay his big brother's important matter. Moreover, he wasn't completely muddle-headed. He knew that if he acted impulsively and foolishly at this moment, in front of everyone in Kunwa City, not only would he have nowhere to escape, he would also implicate his big brother. Exin was extremely anxious. She suddenly ran into the distance, probably to ask for reinforcements. Gang stared at the woman's back for a while and suddenly hesitated. But very quickly, he discovered that his hatred for Lu Chen had unexpectedly surpassed that of Exin. He finally had an answer to the matter that he couldn't understand no matter how hard he thought. When he saw how close Exin and Lu Chen were, a raging fire burned in his heart, burning his heart and organs. Even his eyes turned red. It was at this time that he suddenly saw a familiar figure on the bustling street. It was Exin. When the time came, he would definitely treat this sister-in-law with special respect. He would sincerely instruct his big brother and sister-in-law to achieve supreme glory and become great figures whose names could shake the world. Could it be that they already had a secret affair since they were in the land of chaos? A talented man and a beautiful woman, who wouldn't be envious of them? He had no love for Exin now, only bone-deep hatred. "I can't harm my big brother." This was the greatest strength Gang could muster to suppress all the violent emotions in his heart. He fiercely glared at the young girl who seemed to have a lot on her mind and was about to leave. Gang wasn't an idiot with a one-track mind, so he was naturally grateful. Without this big brother's care, he felt that he wouldn't be able to walk in front of people. He was afraid that even if he died and rotted on the side of the road, no one would be willing to look at him again. Big brother's business was his business. It was a big deal. If it was possible, even if there was only a glimmer of hope, He Gang did not want to disappoint his elder brother. In other words, He had privately given him a token of the Kunlun party. Intimidated by the prestige of the Kunlun party in this place, He Gang was able to get some information from those big shops and had a few suspected useful clues. However, after he and He secretly investigated and verified these things, they all proved to be useless. Unfortunately, this matter still didn't have a good ending. On this day when he came out of that big shop empty-handed, his mood was still somewhat gloomy. Just before he went to the land of chaos, he was still a person with a bright future ahead of him. He was a young talent that many people in the Kunlun party thought highly of. Not to mention he still had a big brother who many elders in the sect thought highly of and even had hopes of becoming a Yuaniing immortal in the future. All of a sudden, He Gang felt as if he was suddenly enlightened. It was as if ice and snow had been poured on his head. His entire body suddenly felt cold from head to toe. In that instant he seemed to understand everything. He stared fixedly at the man beside EXN, his mind churning. Then he finally remembered that he seemed to have seen this person before in the land of chaos. In the midst of all this, he accidentally bumped into a silent fat man standing in the crowd. However, both he and the fat man seemed to be absent-minded and didn't pay attention to it. Therefore, when He Gang squeezed his way forward, he didn't notice that the fat man in the crowd had a very deep look of worry in his eyes. He was staring fixedly at Lu Qin, who had been captured by the Su family. However, all the things that he had dreamed of, seemed to suddenly shatter before his eyes. At that moment He Gang felt his mind go blank, but it also felt like the raging waves of the sea, lightning flashing and thunder rumbling. He felt as if he had faintly thought of something extremely important, but he just couldn't grasp it. What did this mean? However, according to the two useless young masters of the Su family, it seemed that Su Qingjun really did beat up her own brothers for this man. Could it be that the fairy-like perfect woman actually had an affair with this man? Sure enough, that Lu Qin wasn't a good person. If it wasn't for him leading the way without his guidance, who would go to the dangerous Black Armor Mountain? Who would encounter such a terrifying pack of black jackals? He stood in the crowd and secretly watched the development of the matter. Then he quickly figured out the gist of what had happened. It was that guide. It was that damn guide who led them to the Black Armor Mountain to find the Dusk Fog Flower, but in the end caused them to be besieged by the terrifying pack of black jackals. However, everything was shattered after that trip to the land of chaos, after that nightmarish journey to the Black Armor Mountain. However, at this moment suddenly, a man walked out from the crowd on the long street and greeted EXN. This immediately attracted He Gang's attention. Following that, the seemingly close relationship between him and EXN also made He Gang's heart burn. He Gang was such a person. For a moment, He Gang's heart surged with an impulse to rush over and grab that woman. He wanted to stab her several times, cut her face, and then interrogate her while dripping with blood. Why did she do this to me? It's him, everything is because of him. Such a voice was like the howling of an evil spirit roaring in He Gang's ears, occupying all his thoughts. At this moment he simply wouldn't think about the other facts that he had deliberately ignored. The moment he saw EXN, He Gang's body suddenly trembled. At that moment, it was hard to describe his feelings. In fact, looking back on the past, he really couldn't say how deeply he loved this woman. However, later on, this seemingly innocent girl suddenly used such a cruel and tragic method to bite back at him, directly sending him into the 18 levels of hell. This was something that he had never expected at all. Brother Lu? She actually called his name so intimately, as if they had reached a certain level of intimacy. However, looking at this man, he looked so ordinary where, for example, EXN wouldn't have known Lu Qin at all. For example, EXN had also been seriously injured when she returned from the land of chaos. For example, from the beginning to the end, he had been the one to pester EXN. In his heart, perhaps EXN should compensate him for the harm he had suffered. He hid in the shadows by the roadside and looked at Lu Qin and EXN with eyes that were about to spit fire. He watched as they chatted intimately, as well as those intentional and unintentional intimate gestures. This slut, how dare you betray my big brother? All of you are evil, the entire world is evil. He roared angrily in his heart. Then he watched as the Su family arrogantly humiliated Lu Qin and took him away. When did these two adulterous men and women hook up? How could a woman like Su Qingjun have any relationship with this ant-like man named Lu Qin? He didn't mind this too much and didn't say anything to He Gang. However, He Gang took it to heart and always felt that he had let his big brother down. It must have something to do with this man. They must have had an affair, so this adulterous man and woman deliberately harmed us. Therefore, although he hadn't made any progress in tracking down the cinnabar in the shops in Kunwa City, he also told him that if there was no hope in this matter, he should put it off for now. There was no harm in thinking of other methods while he was on Mount Kunlun. However, He Gang still held on to a sliver of hope and secretly continued to inquire and investigate. It couldn't be said that love turned into hate. He Gang's pupils suddenly shrank as if he had been struck by lightning. For the bustling Kunwa City, this day was probably just an ordinary day, but for many people, it was perhaps even more lively than usual. However, this matter was still very difficult to deal with. First, there were too many shops in the city and cinnabar wasn't considered a particularly precious spiritual material, so many shops sold it. Second, he was investigating the identity of the buyer, which was actually quite embarrassing. Shops with small buyers wouldn't pay attention to it at all, but shops with big buyers would keep a close eye on it and wouldn't easily reveal it. During this period of time, for the sake of the task, his big brother, he had been secretly wandering among the shops of various sizes in Kunwa City to inquire about the spiritual material cinnabar. At that moment, He Gang wished he could tear Lu Chen into 1,000 pieces. Staring at the two people, He Gang was burning with rage. He let out a silent roar and was about to pounce on these adulterous men and women. But right at this moment, a group of people suddenly rushed out from the other side and surrounded Lu Chen and Exan. This bastard named Lu Chen unexpectedly had a relationship with Su Qingjun, who was famous in the Kunlun party and was almost synonymous with perfection and fairy. That aloof fairy-like woman. In the crowd, He Gang clenched his fists and couldn't help gasping for breath. He felt as if the blood in his whole body was about to boil. At this moment, he even hated Su Qingjun to the bone. He resolutely followed the group of people from the Su family. Along the way, he watched Lu Chen being pushed and beaten. The pleasure in his heart couldn't be any greater. When he was about to reach the gate of the Su residence, because there were already a lot of onlookers around, he had no choice but to desperately squeeze his way in. That day, among the 3 people on the Black Armor Mountain, Exion's cultivation was the lowest and she had the least experience. But why did Martial Uncle Han die tragically, and he was seriously injured and disfigured, but this woman was safe and sound? He even offended all the young masters of the Su family in Kunwa City and even caused them to be beaten up. But very soon He Gang found another thing that made him even more jealous. So much so that when he saw those people from the Su family pushing and beating Lu Chen, a trace of cold and ruthless killing intent flashed across the depths of his eyes. In pain, people were always willing to believe what they liked, regardless of whether it was right or wrong. Until today he became like this, neither a human nor a ghost. Not only did he implicate his big brother, he was also punished and he was even driven out of the Kunlun party. In such a miserable situation, the source of everything was instantly transferred to this hateful man. He Gang, who had originally taken a step forward, suddenly stopped. The two brothers had a good relationship since childhood. He was a bit older than He Gang, but his talent and luck were far better than his, so it was always He who took care of him. Even after the incident with the Xian, even though he suffered a lot of criticism and pressure, he didn't give up on his younger brother. Chapter 167. This fatty was of course Old Ma. Old Ma stood in the crowd, looking with worry at Lu Chen, who had been captured by the Su family. He was originally a secret agent, so he was very well informed. The time it took for the Su family to clash with Lu Chen on the street, and the time it took for him to be escorted to the gates of the Su residence was enough for him to know what had happened. Old Ma rushed over and saw the scene of pushing and shoving in front of the gates of the Su residence. His face was as gloomy as water, his pupils slightly contracted. Someone pushed forward and bumped into him, but he did not even react, his gaze only fixed on Lu Chen. Then, when Lu Chen was escorted to the gates of the Su residence by the crowd, the servants and guards in the gatehouse rushed out to speak with Su Qian, Su Wen and the others. He temporarily stopped and turned his head to look. In the blink of an eye they saw each other. Their gazes met in the air. Old Ma's lips moved slightly. After taking a deep breath he took a step forward. But at this time, Lu Chen suddenly shook his head lightly. Old Ma immediately stopped, standing stiffly in place like a pillar, even if his eyes flashed with a layer of indescribable pain and anger. His hands were hidden in his wide sleeves, clenched into fists, his fingernails digging into his flesh, leaving deep white marks. His gaze was silent, but it seemed to say something. Two silent men standing in the crowd seemed to be a lonely shadow outside of this world. At this point in life, it was like a trace of mud flitting across the years, or like someone's meaningless and distant sigh. So, there were actually so many more important things. Old Ma raised his head, looking at the sky. It was daytime, the sky bright and clear. In this beautiful world, in this bright day, how could there be a shadow? He gritted his teeth but smiled and then slowly lowered his head. Lu Qin was escorted into the Su residence. Without a doubt, this was the first time Lu Qin had come to the Su family's mansion in Kunwu City. This was the place where the Su clan resided in Kunwu City, and it was also their most fundamental foundation. Over the years, many extraordinary people had come out of this mansion, and they had allowed the Su family to prosper for many years. Even today, the Su family had not declined, and in the foreseeable future, it seemed that the Su family would continue to prosper. This was because another talented genius had appeared here. She was like a perfect fairy who lived on the Flying Goose Terrace. The Su residence was of course very large and at the same time very luxurious. Moreover, because it had flourished for many years, it had a deep heritage and accumulation, so there was also an extremely deep aura of nobility here. The paintings on the veranda, the exquisite carvings of birds and beasts on the eaves, the seemingly ordinary but actually incomparably precious flowers and trees, all of them showed that this place was different from the rest, showing that the Su family was a truly famous and influential clan. However, compared to the heavy accumulation in the surroundings, Su Qian, Su Wen, and the others who were escorting Lu Qin seemed somewhat out of place. Each and every one of them was in high spirits, arrogant and domineering. The servants who passed by on the road retreated one after another, and those who didn't have time to greet them hurriedly. Su Qian and Su Wen naturally didn't have the time to talk nonsense with these servants. At most, when they saw a few pretty young maidservants, they would laugh heartily and hug them to take advantage of them. They would touch here and there and pat their buttocks, causing those maidservants to turn pale and scatter in all directions like startled birds. Then they would laugh at their backs and shout, You, come to my room tonight, I, your young master, have taken a fancy to you." The attendants at the side all laughed heartily. Each and every one of them seemed to be very excited. The only person in the crowd who didn't laugh was probably Lu Qin. None of the surrounding people of the Su residence stood out to speak. After all, Su Qian, Su Wen, and that young Master Sumo who was still recuperating were known as the three heroes of the Su family. They were the most favored of the younger generation of the Su family. In particular, Sumo was the flesh and blood of the current madam of the household. She was normally the most spoiled, and she was also the younger brother of Su Qingjun, who was currently at the peak of her power. It could be said that no one dared to provoke her. When Lord Su and young lady Su Qingjun were here, perhaps they could still manage these young masters. But now that young lady Qingjun was living on the Kunlun Mountains, no one dared to meddle in the matters that Lord Su could not manage. Otherwise they would be punished. Normally there would have been people coming over to reprimand them, but today, it seemed that no one was willing to stand up for them. Su Qian and Su Wen were also fearless. They walked all the way to a courtyard on the west side of the Su residence. Before they entered, Su Wen already shouted, Brother Imo, are you there? Quickly come and see who I've caught for you. Today I'll let you vent your anger, ha." Everyone laughed heartily and walked in together. Lu Qin looked around the courtyard and saw that there was an extremely luxurious two-story building at the front. There was a pond of flowers and plants at the side. The flowers that bloomed were all magnificent and filled with a luxurious atmosphere. It was even more luxurious than the Su residence he saw from the outside. But that kind of dignified atmosphere was nowhere to be found here. In front of the small building there was a large reclining chair. A man was lying on it. His appearance was somewhat similar to Su Qian and Su Wen. It was Sumo. At this moment he sat up and looked over with a surprised expression. Then Su Qian and Su Wen walked over and said a few words to him. Sumo immediately revealed a happy expression. Then he looked in Lu Qian's direction with a somewhat disgusted and ruthless expression. Lu Qian also looked at Sumo. As the most unlucky of the three brothers of the Su family that day on the Flying Goose platform, Su Qingjuan's attack on him. Oh, actually, it was his foot that was the heaviest. It was said that this fellow broke several bones and couldn't get up for half a month. Looking at his current appearance, it seemed that he really hadn't fully recovered. Once a woman flipped out, it was still very scary. In Lu Qian's mind flashed the image of Su Qingjuan's valiant and heroic posture, after flipping the table on the Flying Goose platform. He couldn't help but laugh in his heart. But on the surface he still quickly lowered his head and didn't look at the people around him, appearing somewhat timid. Just now at the Su residence's front door he saw old Ma. With their many years of working together in friendship, even if it was just a silent glance, they were able to exchange a lot of information and thoughts. He saw old Ma's worry, but in the end he still stopped him. The evil sect spy hiding in the Kunlun Mountains had still not been found. No matter what, it was not the time for him to expose his identity. Since he had to compromise, since he was determined to endure it, then there was no point in continuing to resist. Bring him over. Sumo, who was sitting on the rattan chair, shouted loudly. The attendants beside her immediately surrounded Lu Qin and pushed him to the stone steps in front of the small building. Su Qian and Su Wen stood beside Sumo. Sumo looked very excited. She stared at Lu Qin and said with a hideous smile, "Brat, do you still recognize me?" "Yes, you are Master Su." Lu Qin replied honestly. Sumo laughed and said, "You didn't expect this day would come, right?" Lu Qin sighed and said, "Master Su, if I say that what happened that day was a misunderstanding and it really has nothing to do with me, will you believe me?" Beh. The three brothers of the Su family on the steps spat in unison, their faces showing disdain. Sumo said fiercely, "Do you think we are fools?" Su Wen stood at the side and sneered, "In the past, Sister June was so good to us and would grant all our requests. But after you came to the Flying Goose platform, so many things happened. What not seeing us, what scolding us for waiting, and finally even beating us. Who else can we blame but you?" Sumo snorted and said, "Why are you talking so much nonsense with this guy? Damn it. I've been beaten up for no reason, and I've long been stifled in my heart. Today I must vent my anger." After saying that, he suddenly raised his voice and roared, "Someone bring my treasures here." Someone at the side had already answered. Then two people went and walked into the small building, laughing and joking. After a while they came out with a few big boxes and placed them in front of the three brothers of the Su family. Then they opened them one by one. Everyone present, including the Su family brothers and the servants, laughed coldly. Their laughter was bone-chilling, like wild beasts that were about to devour people. "Kid, do you want to pick one for yourself?" Sumo clicked her tongue and narrowed her eyes. Like a cat, she looked at the mouse that she had caught with a tyrannical gaze. She grinned and said, "Don't worry, I won't let you die so easily." Lu Qin looked down and saw that the boxes were neatly arranged, and they were all strangely shaped instruments of torture. At this moment, those incomparably sharp blades, those hair-raising spikes, and all kinds of indescribable and terrifying torture tools were all emitting a cold radiance under the sunlight that fell from the sky. For the first time, Lu Qin's face became gloomy. Then he raised his head and quietly glanced at the three arrogant and domineering Su family brothers standing on the steps. His eyes were cold. Outside the Su family's gate, the crowd of onlookers had yet to disperse. There would never be a lack of busybodies. It was in many people's nature to watch the fun. The gang stood in the crowd. He was a little anxious, a little excited, and a little regretful that he couldn't go in and see Lu Qin being punished. However, the words that came from the crowd around him from time to time still made him obtain great satisfaction. The rumor that the three brothers of the Su family liked to use torture to punish their servants and make them beg for death, although there was no evidence, it was vividly described as if it was true. In the crowd, He gang was happy. On the other side, old Ma's face was slightly trembling and twisted. He was forcibly suppressing the anger and anxiety in his heart. It was at this time that they suddenly raised their heads at the same time and looked towards the sky. A bright ray of light, like a shocking rainbow, flew over. The sharp whistling sound of breaking through the air was deafening. It could be seen how fast it was. In just a moment, this rainbow light directly landed in front of the Su family's gate. Some cultivators in the crowd with better eyesight had already cried out in surprise, "This is a golden core cultivator." Chapter 168. When the light dissipated, a beautiful woman appeared in front of the gates of the Su residence. This immediately caused a commotion in the surrounding crowd, as well as the group of servants and guards of the Su residence. All of a sudden, the crowd gathered around him and greeted him one after another. However, behind the crowd, there was a manservant whose expression suddenly changed. After looking left and right, he took advantage of the crowd's inattention to sneak away and ran into the depths of the Su residence. Old Li, who was standing at the front of the crowd, was the first to call out, "Young miss, why are you back?" This person was naturally Su Qingjun. At this moment, she was dressed no different from usual, with a scarlet feather cape and a long sword on her back. But her expression did not look good. After looking at the surrounding people, she nodded to Old Li, who was standing at the front of the crowd, and called out, "Uncle Li." Old Li had been in the Su family for many years, and it could be said that he had watched this generation of youngsters grow up. In the past, when Su Qingjun was still at home, she would respectfully call him Uncle Li when they met. But at this moment, when Old Li saw Su Qingjun's expression, his heart skipped a beat. In the past, although Su Qingjun was indifferent in front of others, she had always been well-mannered and polite to servants and her other brothers and sisters. But today, although there seemed to be no change on the surface, there seemed to be a faint anger in her. Standing on the stone steps of the main entrance, Su Qingjun looked back and saw that the street in front of the Su residence was surrounded by many people, all of them stretching their necks to look in this direction. Her expression slightly sank and she asked Old Li, "What's going on?" Old Li did not know what to say for a moment, but when Su Qingjun looked at him and slightly furrowed her brows, that natural majesty and reverence towards the legendary Jin Dan friar made him quickly make a decision. No matter how arrogant the three young masters of the Su family were, how could they be compared to the genius girl in front of him? As a result, Old Li obediently recounted what he had just seen. At the end, he pointed at the crowd in front of him and said, "Young masters Su Qian and Su Wen captured the people and brought them into the manor. Those people were the ones who had come to watch along the way and have been waiting here for a long time." A trace of anger flashed across Su Qingjun's face, and she asked in a low voice, "What does that person look like?" Old Li thought for a moment, then described the appearance of the man who had been captured by Su Qian and Su Wen. A few of the servants beside him also added a few sentences to the story. For the servants of this kind of rich and powerful family, observing one's expression was the most basic skill. The few people here only watched for a while, and they could faintly see that this young miss of their family was very dissatisfied with the actions of the few young masters. Anyway, no matter who made the choice, the Su family would definitely rely on this young miss in the future, so there was nothing to hide. The serious thing was, if they did not say anything now and someone had the intention to complain in the future, then it would be terrible. After listening to Old Li and the others describe the appearance of the person who had been captured, Su Qingjun quickly determined that it was most likely Lu Chen. As for why Su Qian and Su Wen would suddenly find trouble with Lu Chen, Su Qingjun also had an idea in her heart, but it was also because of this that she became even more angry and a little worried. So after listening to Old Li's words, she quickly nodded her head, and then walked into the Su residence with a cold face. Naturally, no one dared to stop her, and in an instant, a path opened up. Unexpectedly, at this moment, a servant girl suddenly ran out of the Su residence. She had a pretty appearance and looked to be around 14 or 15 years old. Her expression was a little anxious, and when she saw Su Qingjun walk in, she hurriedly ran over with large strides. She first bowed to Su Qingjun, then hurriedly said in a loud voice, "Young miss, Madam heard that you've returned and is very happy. She wants you to meet her in the front hall." Su Qingjun's footsteps stopped, and a trace of surprise appeared on her face. "Mother wants me to go over?" The servant girl nodded repeatedly and said with a smile, "Yes, Madam said that she hasn't seen you in a long time. It's rare for young miss to return today, so she wants to see you immediately." A trace of hesitation flashed across Su Qingjun's face. Since she was young, she had been taught to be an educated and reasonable person, to be filial to her parents, and to be friendly to her younger siblings. These should have been things that were right and proper. Moreover, after she entered the Kunlun party, she lived on the mountain for a long time, and the number of times she returned home had decreased, and she rarely had the opportunity to be in front of her parents. Thinking of this, she glanced in the direction of the west side of the Su residence. She still understood the few younger brothers and cousins in the family. Although they were usually a little naughty and mischievous, they were respectful in front of her. She also didn't hear that they had done anything too vile. After a while, there shouldn't be any big problems, right? After thinking for a while, she nodded her head and said to the servant girl, "Okay, then I'll go over." The front hall of the Su residence was behind the courtyard, and looking from afar, it was a spacious, square and grand house. At this moment, the doors and windows were open and several servant girls walked in and out. When they saw Su Qingjun walk in, they all revealed a smile and greeted her, and the sound of young miss rose and fell. Of course, Su Qingjun wouldn't show any face to these servant girls. There was no need, and it didn't conform to her character. After lightly nodding in acknowledgement, she walked into the hall, and saw the woman sitting in the main seat in the hall. If one were to calculate her age, she should actually be in her early 40s, but she maintained herself very well, and there were almost no wrinkles on her face. She was slightly plump, fair and plump, and the outline of her appearance was also somewhat similar to Su Qingjun. It could be seen that when she was young she should have been a great beauty. Most of Su Qingjun's current appearance should also be inherited from her. After seeing Su Qingjun, the madam immediately stood up, and with a happy smile on her face she waved at Su Qingjun and said, "Juner, you're back. Quickly come over and let me see you. I haven't seen you for a while." Su Qingjun responded, walked in front of her mother and helped her to sit down. The madam's surname was Bai and she was born in the Bai clan, one of the influential families in Kunwa City, so most people called her Madam Bai. At this moment, Madam Bai looked at her daughter with eyes full of heartache and love. She grabbed Su Qingjun's hand and put it on her knee, and the two of them sat together and chatted for a while. It seemed that she was afraid that her beloved daughter would suffer in Kunlun Mountain. Su Qingjun also felt somewhat helpless, but she still felt some warmth in her heart. In this world, no matter what, the love of parents was still the most sincere and considerate. After answering Madame Bai's questions one by one, she finally said with a smile, "Mother, you don't need to be so worried. Don't forget that I've also cultivated to the Jin Dan realm. In any case, I'm a Jin Dan friar. I'm immune to cold and heat and I won't get sick. Don't worry." Madame Bai snorted, stroked her daughter's black, shiny and soft long hair and said, "If I came from an ordinary family I might believe you. Unfortunately, in any case, I'm the daughter of the Bai clan, and I've been married to the Su family for dozens of years. How could I not know these things about cultivation?" She sighed and her face looked a little sad and worried. She said to Su Qingjun, "As a cultivator, if you have some achievements in cultivation, you naturally won't have the illnesses of ordinary people. But how can you not have troubles just like that? All kinds of hardships and pain in cultivation, the backlash of taking pills and spiritual materials, and all kinds of dangers when breaking through to the next realm. On the contrary, it's still much more than ordinary people. Even when you cultivators quarrel and fight with others, those with high cultivation often want to kill people. Do you think I don't know?" Su Qingjun was also speechless. Then she smiled bitterly and said, "Mother, it's actually not as exaggerated as you say." Madame Bai patted her hand and gently said, "I know. Anyway, you can be considered to have some achievements in cultivation. I'm also a little more relieved. But you still have to take care of yourself, understand?" "And I understand. Also, when you are on the Kunlun Mountain, when you have time, take care of your younger brother Sumo. As for the rest of the family, you can do as you see fit. Heir is your biological younger brother. His talent is not as high as yours. It's also my fault. When I was giving birth to him, I met with something that didn't go my way. Anger attacked my heart and caused me to have a difficult birth, causing his innate vitality to be damaged." Su Qingjun softly said, "Mother, don't worry. I will naturally take good care of my younger brothers at home." Madame Bai looked at her and her face slightly darkened. She said, "That's right. A few days ago when Heir came back from the mountain, he was seriously injured. He couldn't get out of bed for 10 days to half a month. I originally wanted to investigate this matter. In the end, after carefully interrogating Su Qian and Su Wen, they said that it was you who injured Heir. I scolded them at that time, saying how could that be possible? You are Heir's biological sister, how could this be?" Su Qingjun was silent for a moment. She looked at Madame Bai's face and said in a low voice, "Mother, that matter was indeed done by me." Madame Bai tightened her grip on Jun Linyuan's hand. She didn't speak for a while. She just stared at Jun Linyuan and frowned. "Jun, I know your temperament. You are usually the most sensible person in the world. You also love your younger siblings very much. What happened? Why did you have to be so heavy-handed? Why did you have to teach your half-brother a lesson?" Su Qingjun's face showed a slight struggle. After hesitating for a while, she shook her head and said, "Mother, when my younger brother was on the mountain that day, he did indeed do something wrong." Madame Bai's face darkened. She said, "What on earth did he do wrong? Tell me." Su Qingjun had no choice but to tell her what happened on the Flying Goose platform that day. After listening to her, a trace of displeasure flashed across Madame Bai's face. She said lightly, "Just for an irrelevant person you broke your younger brother's bones. Isn't this a bit too much?" When Su Qingjun wanted to explain more, suddenly from outside the hall, from somewhere far away in the mansion of the Su mansion, came a sudden burst of noise and shouting. Among them there were people laughing loudly and there were also people shouting in pain. Su Qingjun suddenly stood up and looked out of the room. Her face instantly darkened. Chapter 169. I'm going out for a walk. Su Qingjun turned around and said to Madame Bai, She was about to walk out, but she heard Madame Bai suddenly call her and said, June, come and sit down. I have something to tell you. Su Qingjuan's body froze in place. After a moment of hesitation, she frowned slightly and said to Madame Bai in a soft voice, Mother, I have something urgent to deal with now. Can I come and talk to you after I'm done? Madame Bai stared at her, and her face gradually darkened. She said lightly, Why? In your opinion, is there anything more important than your parents in this world? Su Qingjun was stunned and speechless. She turned around to look at Madame Bai and said, Mother, how can you have such a thought? I've never disrespected you. Madame Bai looked at her for a while and suddenly sighed. She said, My good daughter, of course I believe you. Come here. She waved at Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun was a little hesitant, but then she slowly walked over. Madame Bai stood up and gently held her in her arms. There was a trace of love on her face. She murmured, In this world, how can there be parents who don't love their children? June, I'm really thinking about you. Su Qingjun was silent for a moment. She said, Mother, I still don't quite understand what you mean. Madame Bai shook her head and said, You're in a hurry to go out now. Do you want to go to your brother's place? Su Qingjun suddenly raised her head and looked at Madame Bai. She looked surprised and blurted out, Mother, how did you know? She paused for a moment and then her face turned cold. She said, Then you also know what Sumo did? Madame Bai gently waved her hand and said, That child is only a little naughty. It's only because you beat him up so badly last time that he has nowhere to vent his anger. He doesn't dare to cause trouble for you. Isn't he just casually finding an insignificant servant to vent his anger on? What's there to be surprised about? Su Qingjuan's eyes showed some surprise and anger. She said in a low voice, That's not right. Madame Bai snorted and said, There are many big and small aristocratic families in Kunwu City. There are many young people there who beat people to vent their anger. Beating and scolding is like a common thing. Don't say it as if you haven't seen it since you were a child. Su Qingjun wanted to say something but she hesitated. She clenched her teeth and said after a long while, Mother, that's different. He's a Kunlun disciple. He's just a part-time disciple. Madame Bai suddenly raised her voice and said, He has no talent and no background. What's the difference between him and the servants in our family? Su Qingjun slowly clenched her fists inside her sleeves, but her head slightly drooped. Seeing her expression, Madame Bai's heart seemed to soften. She lowered her voice and said softly, June, you're the most outstanding person in our Su family. You're also the child that both your father and I love the most. If nothing unexpected happens in the future, the foundation of our Su family will definitely be handed over to you. Even if you're infatuated with cultivation and have no interest in worldly money, when your younger brother inherits the family business in the future, won't he also have to fulfill all your requests and do his best to provide for you? You must always remember that we're a family. Blood is thicker than water. Nothing can compare to this. Su Qingjun slowly raised her head and suddenly said, Mother, did Sumo say something to you? Madame Bai glared at her and said, What's Sumo? Sumo is not Sumo. He's your younger brother. After that she said lightly, You're so young now but you've already cultivated to the Jin Dan realm. Your future is limitless. Not to mention Jinren Yuanying, you can even have a chance to explore deity transformation stage Jinren. With such a bright future, how could a good-for-nothing part-time disciple be worthy of you? Su Qingjun was stunned. Then she slowly shook her head as if she couldn't believe it. She said bitterly, How could you think like that? How could you say that? Madame Bai's face darkened. She said, Am I wrong? Do you dare to swear to God that you don't have the slightest affection for that man named Lu Qin? Su Qingjun was just about to speak, but she suddenly fell silent. After a while she smiled bitterly and said, Mother, you're thinking too much. It's not like that at all. It's true everyone has a time when they're young. Madame Bai suddenly interrupted her and said coldly, Everyone is young and full of love. It's human nature. It's not a big deal. Even when I was young before I married your father, my heart was also moved by those free and unrestrained wastrels who roamed the world. But in the end? She smiled faintly and didn't continue speaking. Instead, she gently held Su Qingjuan's hand and said, June, listen to your mother. I'm doing this for your own good. Su Qingjun took a deep breath and shook her head. She said, Mother, I think you've really misunderstood. I dare to swear to God that from the beginning to the end, since I joined the Kunlun party to cultivate, I've never had an affair. But this matter has nothing to do with Lu Qin. Sumo has found the wrong person. As she said this, she turned around and walked quickly towards the door of the hall. Madame Bai suddenly shouted, "Stop!" Su Qingjuan's body paused for a moment. She looked back at her and said, "Mother, haven't I already said?" Madame Bai said coldly, "Why don't you take a look at yourself now? For an outsider who has nothing to do with us, you look like you're burning with anxiety. You're in such a hurry to make things difficult for your own brother?" Su Qingjun said loudly, "I'm not going to make things difficult for him. It's him who did something wrong. If he has the ability, he can come to me. I'm the one who hurt him. Why does he want to vent his anger on me?" Slap. Suddenly, a crisp sound came from the hall. It was Madame Bai who slapped Su Qingjun hard in the face with a livid face. Su Qingjun covered her cheek with her hand. There was a look of disbelief in her eyes. She looked at Madame Bai in astonishment. It seemed that even her voice was a little shaky. She said, "Mother, I'm hitting you to wake you up." Madame Bai said coldly, "What? Do you think you're great now that you're Jean Dan Friar? You can crush me with one finger. That's nothing. Come over and draw your sword and kill me." Su Qingjun took a step back. There was a painful expression on her face. She shook her head and said, "Mother, how could I?" Madame Bai took a deep breath and calmed down her unusually excited mood. Then she stared at Su Qingjun and said, "Jun, listen to me. Your father and I are not young anymore. How can there be immortality in this world? Our only wish is that you and can help each other for the rest of your life. Because in this world there's no one who is closer than blood. If you don't believe in your own brother and this blood, who else can you believe in?" Looking at Su Qingjun, she raised her voice and yelled with unusual anger, "But now you're going to make things difficult for your brother for an outsider. How can I be at ease after 100 years? Are you trying to anger me to death?" She scolded Su Qingjun angrily, as if she was looking at a child who was resentful of iron for not becoming steel. There was even a faint trace of tears in her eyes. Su Qingjun stepped back in a daze. She grew up listening to heaven and earth, her parents and her teachers. She was taught to be respectful, and she had always done so. For so many years, no one had ever said that she was wrong. No one had ever not praised her for being sensible and polite. Everyone thought that she was the best daughter in the world. But all of this seemed to have suddenly changed today. "Are you trying to anger me to death?" Her mother's question exploded in her ears like a clap of thunder, causing her to feel dizzy and her mind to go blank. She staggered a few steps back. As if it was instinctive, she subconsciously wanted to walk out. "Listen, I won't argue with you about the matter of you hurting him last time, seeing that we are a family." Madame Bai looked at her coldly from behind and said, "But if you dare to find trouble with him again, I will kill myself in this hall, in front of you." Su Qingjuan's body shook and her face instantly turned pale. She turned around and looked at Madame Bai, as if she was looking at a stranger. 2 streams of tears flowed down her cheeks and she said in a trembling voice, "Mother, why do you have to do this? Why do you have to do this?" Madame Bai's face was ashen as she turned around and no longer looked at her. She said, "If you really dare to disobey me, then go and try it yourself. Otherwise hurry up and leave this place now. Immediately return to Kunlun Mountain. Leave immediately." At the end of her words, her tone was harsh and stern. Su Qingjun looked at her in a daze. Then she slowly walked out of the hall. Under the strange gazes of the servants, she used her hand to wipe away the tears on her face. This way she could pretend that she was still perfect. She slowly, step by step, walked towards the front. From the depths of the mansion, tyrannical laughter and painful voices still floated over from time to time. There were even more joyful laughter as if she was the accomplice of a villain. But her footsteps still involuntarily walked towards the Su Fu's main gate. Heaven and earth, father and mother. High like a peak, heavy like a mountain. She raised her head and looked at the sky. The azure blue sky seemed to have no end. It was so deep and vast, endless. Her face was pale, as if there was not a trace of blood. Unknowingly, she really did walk in front of the Su Fu's main gate. The group of servants and guards hurriedly came forward. The one leading them was still old Li. Looking at Su Qingjuan's face, he said with some worry, "Eldest young miss, are you all right?" Su Qingjun did not respond to his words. She only stared blankly at the several stone steps in front of the Su Fu's main gate. She had never thought that these stone steps in her own house would be so difficult to walk. The most difficult thing in the world was it the ways of the world? Her face was pale as she stood in front of this huge aristocratic family's main gate. She stood under the Su family's large signboard. The people at the side looked at each other, but for a moment, no one dared to say anything. She did not know how long she stood there. The wind blew past her body, her hair and clothes all slightly fluttered. Gradually, a clear and cold feeling seeped out. Clear as water. Cold as ice and frost. She suddenly turned her head and looked at Old Li. She opened her mouth. Her voice was like the clear ringing of a bell in the wind. There was not the slightest bit of dirt. She quietly asked, "Uncle Li? May I ask if there is a table in your room?" Chapter 170. That day was supposed to be a very, very ordinary day in Kunwa City. It was bustling, people coming and going, merchants and goods flourishing. The cultivators were in high spirits, and the ordinary mortals lived in peace and contentment. The big clans in the city were also like this, enjoying the shade under their own big trees, peacefully and leisurely passing every good time. How many years had it been? Hadn't it always been like this? No one had ever thought of changing, and no one was willing to change. The Su family, a big clan in Kunwa City, was also like this. Until that quiet afternoon, when an exceptionally mournful and soul-shaking sharp whistle suddenly appeared in this deep courtyard, as if it had pierced through the heaven and earth and shattered all the tranquility, tearing everything to shreds. Boom. It was a deafening sound. Like a thunderbolt on a clear day, like a thunderstorm, it exploded in this big residence, causing everyone to turn their heads in astonishment, causing the hall to shake and causing the ground to tremble. Like a tiger's roar breaking through the mountain forest, it swept across the clear sky like an invisible but incomparably swift and violent wave, wildly and ferociously surging in all directions. A table flew into the air. It was a square black wooden table, plain and simple, without too many exquisite and flashy carvings, only deep and heavy. It flew up. A table flew up. The table didn't have any intelligence. If it did, it certainly wouldn't have thought that in its ordinary life, it would unexpectedly have such a brilliant and world-shaking fortuitous encounter. It flew into the air, emitting a deafening sharp whistle, then broke through the sky and flew away. Wherever the flying table passed, it was invincible and unstoppable. People were thrown off their feet, horses were thrown off their feet, trees were toppled over and walls were split open. Like a fierce tiger descending the mountain, like a divine dragon entering the sea, wild and unruly, with a violent determination, it advanced courageously. Amidst the rumbling sound, dust flew everywhere, and the entire Su residence was in chaos. Screams and cries instantly rang out everywhere. Everyone was overwhelmed with shock, not knowing what had happened. Only that table, alone and proud, flew over the crowd, passed over the gazes, knocked down the trees and broke through the high walls. It was a flying table. It rushed into the sky and arrived with a rumbling sound. As a result, the sand and stones scattered in heaven and earth resonated with each other. A huge cloud of dust seemed to have condensed into an earth dragon, rumbling from afar. It was like a hot knife through butter. From the depths of the pavilions and courtyards, it forcibly broke open a path to that small courtyard. Finally, in a deafening noise, a large hole was first smashed open in Sumo's courtyard. Then cracks appeared everywhere and strange noises were heard. A moment later, in a rumbling noise, an entire wall collapsed with a loud rumble. Dust flew up into the air. Everyone was dumbstruck. They turned their heads to look in that direction, and in the depths of the dust cloud, a faint breeze blew over. A figure slowly walked out from the thick dust cloud. With a long sword on his back, his expression was cold. Like a lonely and proud woman in the world, she stepped through the dust and walked into this place. The air reeked of blood. Su Qingjuan's gaze passed through the shocked crowd and saw Lu Chen lying on the ground. That man seemed to have lost a lot of blood. There seemed to be many wounds on his body. Those wounds looked very deep and heavy. In some places not only blood and flesh could be seen, but even white bones could be seen. It was a horrible sight and it made one's hair stand. But for some reason, even with such heavy injuries, the man did not faint. He seemed to still be very conscious. Even if this was an unbearable pain for ordinary people, he would rather endure it than lose his consciousness. Or perhaps he was already used to this kind of pain. When he turned his head to look in the pool of blood, his gaze met with Su Qingjuan's in the air. He looked at her walking over. He was lying in a pool of blood. There did not seem to be much pain on his face at that moment. He was even in the blood. Facing her, he smiled slightly. That bloody smile was shocking and soul-stirring. It was like a sharp sword piercing into her chest, like a raging fire burning her soul. Su Qingjun held her breath. Her body trembled slightly. She clenched her teeth tightly. Just when she wanted to control herself again, she saw that beside the man lying on the ground, there were those terrifying and twisted instruments of torture scattered all over the ground. Those sharp, twisted and bloody blades. It was as if a sudden clap of thunder had suddenly exploded above her head. It was as if a demonic beast lying dormant in the depths of her heart was roaring. That surge of hot blood rushed to her heart, causing her heart to go blank for a moment. She opened her mouth slightly as if she wanted to say something. But for some reason not a single word came out. She could only stare blankly at the man lying in a pool of blood. She clenched her teeth, and a few tears flowed down from the corner of her eyes. Then, like a young child, she used the back of her hand to wipe away the sparkling and dazzling tears on her cheeks. "Hey Sister June, why have you come?" A voice called out from the front. It was Sumo, who was sitting on the chair in front of the small building. She straightened her body and smiled at June. "Why did you make such a big scene? Sister, you are going to tear down our house. But it doesn't matter. Our house doesn't have anything else but money. You can tear it down however you want. At most, we can just rebuild it again in the future." June glanced at Sumo. Without saying a word, she stepped forward and walked towards Lu Chen. The smile on Sumo's face froze. She looked at Su Chen and Su Wen, who were standing beside her. Su Chen coughed and gave a look to the attendants standing below. After a while, someone came over to greet June. He forced a smile and said, "Eldest Miss, look, this is the person that young Master Mo wants." His voice hadn't even finished resounding in the air when a shrill cry suddenly resounded from his mouth. His entire body suddenly rose from the ground. June had stretched out her hand, grabbed his shirt, and then tossed him away like a rock. The dumbfounded crowd watched as the man in midair drew an arc across half of the courtyard. Then, with a bang, he slammed heavily into the wall that was still standing on the opposite side. In an instant, a clear human imprint was left on the wall. Then, with blood flowing from his mouth and nose, he fell to the ground motionlessly. It seemed that he had fainted. In the small courtyard there was a sudden silence. After a while, there was suddenly an angry and irritable voice. It was Sumo. She shouted from the front, "What are you doing? Are you trying to show off to me? Don't forget that we are brother and sister. Brother and sister. Because of an outsider you caused me to be like this. Is it not enough you still want to beat me? Come, if you have the guts, then beat me to death. Beat me to death." He roared furiously like an irritable beast. June looked coldly at him in front of the small building. Her eyes were as cold as snow. She suddenly raised her hand. In this chaotic small courtyard, a clear dragon roar was heard. It was like a ray of autumn water shining into the dust, like a pool of clear water washing the world. A ray of sword light lit up, illuminating her peerless face and reflecting in her clear and bright eyes, emitting a dazzling radiance. The long sword on her back flew out of its sheath. The sword shadows filled the sky. A strange scene appeared. Under the clear sky, a full moon suddenly appeared in the sky. Cold and lonely, unattainable. The moonlight, like water, fell into the world, illuminating the sword light. The sword blade reflected the moonlight. The moonlight turned into silence. All living things in the world held their breath. Only that light from the endless vault of heaven faintly slashed down. It was the moonlight slash. That moment of brilliance seemed to snatch all the years of the world. It was silent. It was like the passing of countless stars, the rising of the sun and setting of the moon. Someone sighed on the other side. The sword light fell, brilliant, stagnated and disappeared. Like the wind and smoke passing by, it disappeared without a trace. Everyone was at a loss. The three Su family brothers in front of the small building were also stunned speechless. They looked at each other and made sure that they were all right. Sumo then heaved a sigh of relief. Just as she was about to speak, suddenly a cracking sound was heard from behind. The three of them turned back in shock. On that incomparably luxurious small building, countless cracks suddenly appeared. Cruelly and coldly smashed all the beautiful splendor, tore all the brick walls and eaves. After a while, suddenly a loud sound was heard. The entire building collapsed. In the flying dust, everyone screamed in fear. The three Su family brothers stumbled, ran and crawled with all their might, shouting. The people around them were also panicking and rushed up to rescue them. The small courtyard immediately became a mess. In the midst of the chaos, the ancient longsword had already quietly returned to its sheath. June no longer paid attention to the chaos. Through the dust, she walked to Lu Chen's side. Just like at the Flying Goose platform, she gently squatted down beside him. She looked at his eyes, at the blood that flowed from his body, and at the little smile on his face that should not have been there, but still showed. She suddenly felt that the sword just now, that little bit of sharpness, seemed to have cut her heart. She had thousands of words she wanted to say, but in the end, after her lips slightly trembled a few times, she still only said softly, "Does it hurt?" "It hurts." Lu Chen nodded and smiled. Su Qingjun lowered her head. A teardrop fell into the dust on the ground, wetting a bit of the ground. "You're so old, why are you crying?" Lu Chen said to her. "And it's not your fault. I'm fine, I won't die." Su Qingjun wanted to laugh, but for some reason more tears flowed. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, then forced a smile and said, "Why are you pretending to be strong again? When I was outside I heard your cry." Lu Chen said, "I didn't want to scream at first, but then I saw a golden light in the sky. I thought that in the Su family probably only you, Jindan Friar, would come. So I shouted to see if you would come to save me." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "You're so smart." Lu Chen said, "Isn't that so?" Su Qingjun stared at him for a long time, then stretched out her hands, hugged his body, and then softly said in a voice that only Lu Chen could hear, "I'm sorry I'm late." "It's okay," Lu Chen said. Chapter 171. Warm blood flowed down from his body and quickly dyed her clothes. Her beautiful and clean clothes also seemed to be dyed with a layer of strange blood. However, Su Qingjun did not care about this. She was more concerned that when she wanted to pick up Lu Chen's body, she discovered that there were even deeper and more cruel wounds on his body. She stared blankly for a while and found that it was difficult to make Lu Chen stand on his own. She could only gently put him down. Then, looking at the bloody mess on his body, she said in a low voice, "Wait for me." Then she stood up and looked around. She walked towards the small courtyard where many attendants, including the 3 Su family brothers, were standing together. The power of the moonlight slash just now was too strong. It had already frightened everyone here, including Sumo, who had not yet recovered. When they saw Su Qingjun walk over, everyone immediately took a few steps back with a look of fear on their faces. Su Qingjun's face was as cold as frost. She pointed at one of the attendants who looked a bit cleaner and said, "Take off your outer clothes." That attendant was stunned for a moment and said in surprise, "What?" Su Qingjun did not say it a second time. She only looked at him coldly. That attendant's legs instantly went soft. He repeatedly said, "Good, good, good." As he said this, he hurriedly took off his outer clothes. He was afraid that if he was a bit slower, his hands and feet would also leave his body like the clothes. Su Qingjun grabbed the outer clothes and walked back to Lu Chen's side. Then she carefully wrapped his body with the clothes, not letting those bloody wounds be exposed in the dust. Lu Chen smiled and said, "There's no need to go through so much trouble." Su Qingjun looked at him and said in a low voice, "Why didn't you die from the pain?" Lu Chen laughed loudly. But after laughing a few times, his voice twisted like the muscles on his face. He sucked in a breath of cold air. It seemed that he had touched a wound somewhere. Su Qingjun shook her head. There was a trace of worry in her eyes. She used all her strength to help him up. At the same time, she put one of Lu Chen's arms on her shoulder so that most of his body was leaning on her body. Then she was about to leave. In the eyes of the other people in the small courtyard, this kind of action was like they had seen a ghost. Especially the 3 Su family brothers, their faces were full of shock. Sumo was the first to jump out. But it seemed that her injuries had not healed very well. She tripped and almost fell. Fortunately, she was supported by Su Qian and Su Wen. He barely managed to stand and shouted at Su Qingyun, "Sister, what are you doing? Do you have an affair with this person?" Su Qingjun looked at him coldly and said, "Shut your stinky mouth." Sumo was furious and shouted, "I am your brother from the same father and mother. Why can't I tell you about your affairs?" Su Qingjun stared at Sumo coldly and said, "If it weren't for the fact that you're my close relative, I would have cut you down with my sword just now based on the heartless evil you've done today. Get lost. You are not allowed to meddle in my affairs in the future." After being glared at by her ice-cold gaze, Sumo recalled the lonely yet terrifying sword light just now. For a moment he couldn't muster up the courage to refute her. However, at this moment, an angry voice suddenly came from outside the door saying, "How dare you? He, as your brother, can't meddle in your affairs. Then what about me as your mother? Do I have the right to meddle in your affairs?" All the people present were moved and turned to look. Sure enough, they saw a well-maintained woman walking in from the door of the small courtyard. It was Madame Bai, the current madam of the Su family. For a moment, many attendants and servants greeted her. The three brothers of the Su family went to greet her. Sumo even limped to Madame Bai and shouted with a little sob, "Mother!" Madame Bai patted him gently on the shoulder, her expression overflowing with affection. She then turned to look at the wretched state of the collapsed trees and collapsed walls. Her brows immediately furrowed, and when she looked at Su Qingjun again, her expression was incomparably gloomy. "Jun, don't you have any respect for me?" Under Madame Bai's threatening gaze, Su Qingjun dodged a little at first. But soon she seemed to have the courage to look straight into her mother's eyes and said, "Mother, I have said that it was my brother's fault today." Madame Bai said angrily, "What did he do wrong? Even if he did something wrong, it's not worth it for you to make such a big fuss. Do you want to tear down our house?" Su Qingjun sneered. She pointed at the frightening torture tools and blades scattered on the ground and said coldly, "Do you see these things? Do you think he made a small mistake when he used these disgusting things to harm people?" She suddenly raised her voice and said loudly, "This is only in our house. If it were in Kunlun Mountain, under the strict rules, what would be waiting for him?" Madame Bai glanced at the torture tools. Suddenly her face turned pale. Obviously she was shocked and even a little frightened. Then, as if she thought of something, she glared at Sumo fiercely. Sumo looked as if he had shrunk into a ball. He lowered his head and didn't say a word. Madame Bai gritted her teeth and cursed in a low voice, "I will deal with you later, you unfilial son." As she said this, she took a deep breath and looked at Su Qingjun again. At this moment, the look in her eyes was a little different. She had already faintly felt that this daughter in front of her, the most outstanding genius in the family, seemed to be somewhat different from before. If Mo did something wrong, he will naturally be punished according to the family rules. Even when your father returns home and finds out about this, he will not be spared. Madame Bai looked at Su Qingjun and said gloomily, "But what I want to know is, have you forgotten what I said to you in the front hall?" She seemed to be very, very angry. She stared at Su Qingjun and said word by word, "You don't care about your mother's life at all?" Su Qingjun smiled faintly. There seemed to be some bitterness and helplessness in her eyes. She shook her head gently and said, "Mother, you know it's not like that." Madame Bai said angrily, "Then why don't you listen to me and come here to make a scene?" Su Qingjun supported Lu Chen and began to walk forward slowly. At the same time she said, "Mother, actually you and I both know that those were just words of anger. You will not die." Madame Bai was so angry that her hand trembled. She pointed at Su Qingjun and said angrily, You disobedient and unfilial daughter." Su Qingjun's expression was a little desolate and lonely. She said, "Have you really touched your own conscience when you speak? For so many years in the Su family, who is the most filial to you and father besides me? Could it be me, this ruthless and incompetent brother?" She supported Lu Chen and slowly walked to Madame Bai. She lowered her voice and said to her softly, "Besides, how can you bear to die? You care so much about your appearance every day. You take care of it for a few hours every day. What you put on and what you eat are all good things to maintain your appearance. And there are so many young mothers and concubines at home. If they don't die, how can you be willing to take a step first, right?" Madame Bai's face instantly turned pale. She looked at Su Qingjun. Her lips trembled slightly, but for a moment she couldn't say anything. Su Qingjun walked past Madame Bai and continued to walk forward. After a moment, Madame Bai suddenly cried and shouted to her, all right. You've grown up. I can't control you anymore. When your father comes back, I will tell him about your disobedient appearance today. Let's see if he will be sad. Let's see if he will care about you." Su Qingjun's footsteps paused for a moment. Then she turned around and looked at her with a strange expression. For a moment, Madame Bai felt uncomfortable under her gaze. She couldn't help but take a step back. Su Qingjun smiled faintly and said, "Mother, don't lie to yourself anymore. Father is much more practical than you. He must know that in the next 10 or even 100 years, who will the Su family really rely on? Will it be me, a 22-year-old Jindan friar, or a group of useless brothers? You see, actually, I really understand everything. I can see everything." Su Qingjun said to her quietly. "It's just that I didn't say anything before." The small courtyard was silent. Everyone was intimidated by Su Qingjun's aura. No one dared to step forward to stop her. They just watched as Su Qingjun slowly half-carried and half-supported Lu Chen out of the small courtyard. When they were about to walk out of the door, Lu Qin, who had been leaning on Su Qingjun, suddenly smiled and said in a low voice, "Well said. Oh, it's all right. Very powerful. Very imposing. Isn't this all thanks to you?" Su Qingjun said softly. "Well, it's all because you taught me to flip tables." "Is that so?" "Yes." "Then I'm also very powerful." "Is it powerful to be almost beaten to death?" "You really don't know how to chat," Lu Qin said helplessly. That day many people in Kunwa City saw the light that once again soared into the sky. They saw the ending of Su Qingjun rushing to save Lu Qin. Among them, the people who saw it the most clearly were the onlookers from the beginning to the end of the Su residence. He Gang and Old Ma were the people who stood outside the Su residence from the beginning to the end. But their reactions were completely different. He Gang looked at the light that went far away in the sky. His eyes were full of hatred as if they were about to spit fire. He gritted his teeth and cursed so loudly that no one could hear him. Then he turned around and left with large strides. "I must inform Big Brother about this matter as soon as possible. That bitch was moved by an ant-like odd-job disciple. She must be a fickle person. She's absolutely not worthy of Big Brother. I must warn Big Brother. Moreover, they are both famous geniuses. If there is a fight in the future, it's not like I can't make use of that ant named Lu Qin." Behind He Gang, the slightly plump old Ma looked like he finally heaved a sigh of relief. His whole body relaxed. But a moment later, when he looked at the Su residence's door again, his gaze changed. It was ice cold with a trace of callousness. Like a wolf or a tiger. Chapter 172. In this world, there are a lot of things that people see on the surface, and then take it for granted that what is going to happen next, or just by looking at a person's appearance, behavior, and movement, they conclude that this person's nature is what it is. Many times they are wrong. An ugly person is not necessarily evil, and a beautiful appearance is not necessarily pure. Those who are loyal to righteousness always come from the generation of dog butchers. Those who are unfaithful are mostly scholars. In the mortal world, whenever people see one or two beautiful men or women, they will be infatuated and intoxicated, falling head over heels in love with them, thinking that there is nothing their beloved isn't beautiful in every way. And in the Xiuxian world there is no exception. There are always many people who revere and admire the high-level cultivators. Looking at those high and mighty figures, they think that the legendary Jindan Friar, Yuanying Jinren, and even the deity transformation stage Jinren are omnipotent. This has nothing to do with cultivation. It is simply human nature. We are too weak, so we are used to looking up at the tall and mighty. We cannot see the tall and mighty's shadow clearly, so we think that the shadow is as tall as a mountain, or even as tall as the sky and the earth, but we forget that everything we see comes from our own vision and vision. When we cannot see too far ahead, we use illusions to fill our own expectations. Su Qingjun is a young genius. At her age, someone who has cultivated to the Jindan realm has never appeared in the long history of the Kunlun party. And because of this, almost everyone has high hopes for her, believing that she will become a great person in the future. She was a genuine prodigy, and her talent and cultivation was outstanding. Countless people, especially the disciples whose cultivation is lower than hers, view her as an idol. They revere and admire her, looking up to her as a role model, thinking that she is omnipotent. Unfortunately, the truth is not like this. In this world, the person who understands Su Qingjun the most naturally is none other than herself. Of course, Su Qingjun knows that she is not the kind of perfect and omnipotent person that other people imagine her to be. She even clearly knows that she has many shortcomings, and there are many things that she cannot do. However, no one would purposely expose their weaknesses to the public. She was not a saint. In the end, she was just an ordinary mortal. She would feel joy, anger, sorrow, and joy. She would have many concerns and restraints. She even had to consider more things than an ordinary person. This was because in the past she had to take care of many more people than an ordinary person. Like all geniuses or those who are loved and revered by others, Su Qingjun instinctively hides all of her shortcomings. In order to hide these traces, she would often turn into a calm, cold, beautiful, and aloof appearance. This effect is tried and true. Those who admire her are distanced from her by her actions. They cannot really get close to her. It is as if their eyes can only look at her figure from afar. So what they see in their eyes is a blurry shadow. So they cannot see the truth. So none of them can see the true appearance of that person. So everyone begins to imagine her to be exceptionally beautiful, turning her into the legendary omnipotent and peerless fairy. Just like countless similar things in the world. This has nothing to do with cultivation, it is just human nature. But what is fake is not real. What is impossible will never be true. Like a thin piece of paper that has been soaked in water, it will be pierced by reality. That day, Su Qingjun feels like she is that thin piece of paper that has been soaked in water. When she intimidates the Su family and chases away everyone, including her mother Madame Bai, she brings Lu Chen back to Fiantai in Kunlun Mountain. The momentum of that moment, the awe-inspiring presence, the resolute words, and the sharp words all make her look so perfect. Even the seriously injured Lu Chen admires her. Until, after she returns to the mountain, she helps Lu Chen back to the hut and puts him down on the bed. Looking at this man who is covered in blood, Su Qingjun panics. Because she does not know how to treat injuries. This was a method that many cultivators, even low-level cultivators with low cultivation and even rogue cultivators were very familiar with, but she didn't know how to do it. Su Qingjun hurriedly brings out a lot of bottles and jars from the cave, which are filled with all kinds of precious herbs and elixirs. Then she looks at Lu Chen who has countless wounds all over his body, and is dumbfounded. As a proud daughter of heaven from a noble family, when has she ever needed to personally deal with this kind of thing? But seeing the urgency of the matter, Su Qingjun does not care too much, and can only do whatever she wants. Therefore those precious medicinal powders and elixirs are casually smeared on Lu Chen's wounds. She does not know if they have any effect, but the bleeding does stop very quickly. Su Qingjun is immediately happy, and then she grabs a few bottles of famous Kunlun elixirs and stuffs them into Lu Chen's mouth. Cough cough cough. Lu Chen, who was pretending to be asleep, coughs violently. He quickly reaches out to block Su Qingjun's medicine bottle and then weakly says, "Don't worry, I won't die for a while. Let's not talk about whether you can cure me like this, I always feel that I might choke to death." Su Qingjun glares at him and says, "I am kind enough to give you elixirs but you talk too much. Are you going to eat it or not?" Lu Chen nodded repeatedly and says, "I have to, but can I eat it later? Besides, I can't eat so many elixirs at once or else the medicinal effects will backfire, and it will be no different from poison." Su Qingjun snorts, seems to know that she is a little too hasty, and puts the jade bottles on the table beside her and says, "You don't know how to appreciate my kindness. I'll leave those things here, you can eat them yourself later. Anyway, you are a mysterious person and I don't know where you come from. You know a lot of things and you should know these things, right?" Lu Chen shook his head with some difficulty and says, "There's no such thing." Su Qingjun sighs and presses down on his hand and says, "All right, I was just saying casually, you should rest quickly." After saying that, she pauses for a moment, and her voice becomes a little deeper. She also lowers her head and says, "This time, you have really suffered a lot. I really didn't expect that my younger brothers at home would be so deranged." A faint glimmer of light flashes in the depths of Lu Chen's eyes, and then he says, "This has nothing to do with you, don't think too much." Su Qingjun still wants to say something, but at this moment suddenly, a voice comes from outside the thatched hut, and someone suddenly shouted, "Little June, come out." Su Qingjun is startled and she stands up and looks a little surprised and says, "My master is here and he ran over at this time, what is he doing?" Lu Chen lies on the bed and smiles and says, "Probably to help someone plead for leniency?" Su Qingjun thinks for a moment and says, "It's not very likely, my master loves me very much, but he is not very kind to the Su family. In the past he always told me that those younger brothers and sisters at home are too troublesome, and that I should not be with them." Halfway through her words, Su Qingjun suddenly stops and Lu Chen says with a smile, "Was he right?" Su Qingjun sighs with a bitter smile, and then she says in a low voice, "You lie here and rest for a while, I'll be back soon." Walking out of the door of the thatched hut, Su Qingjun sees Masato Kihara standing on the Flying Goose Terrace, about 15 feet away from the thatched hut. After seeing her walk out, Masato Kihara also nods in acknowledgement. Su Qingjun quickly walks up to him and says, "Master, why are you here?" Masato Kihara laughs mischievously and says, "I heard you were in the limelight in Kunwu City, and when you returned to the Su family, you made a big fuss, and the whole Kunlun mountain is in an uproar, so I hurried over to take a look." Su Qingjun blushes and she shakes her head and says, "It's not as exaggerated as you say." Masato Kihara chuckles, but he doesn't tease this female disciple anymore. Instead, he glances at the thatched hut and says, "I heard the person you saved is the part-time disciple Lu Chen who helped you plant the eagle fruit tree?" Su Qingjun nods and says, "Yes." Masato Kihara looks at her with a smile that doesn't seem like a smile and says, In the past, I, your master, have advised you many times to draw a clear line with the people in your family, because it's beneficial to your cultivation, but you never listened. But today, for the sake of an ordinary part-time disciple, you suddenly have a falling out with the Su family. Is there any personal feelings involved? By the end of his words, Masato Kihara's eyes have already faintly revealed a sharp light, and he just indifferently looks at Su Qingjun. But Su Qingjun seems to be unaware of anything, and she just says with a bitter smile, "Master, when I first became your disciple, I told you that I'm only interested in cultivation, and I'm too lazy to think about other things. Then why did you save him?" Su Qingjun's face darkens and says, "It's my Su family's brothers who have really gone too far. Even if this person isn't Lu Qin, but just a roadside beggar who has nothing to do with me, I think I probably won't sit idly by." Masato Kihara stares at Su Qingjun for a moment, and suddenly nods and says, "For you to think like this, it's somewhat beyond my expectations. But don't forget, you can save him for a while, but how can you save him for a lifetime? That Lu Chen's cultivation is low. In the future when he's cultivating on the Kunlun mountain, I'm afraid he'll most likely be attacked by the Su family both openly and covertly." Su Qingjun's expression suddenly turns cold. But Masato Kihara doesn't seem to have the intention to let her off, and only says with a smile, "When that time comes, he's just an ordinary part-time disciple and he can't really follow you for a lifetime. He and you are people from two completely different worlds, and he has to do all kinds of dirty and tiring work, while you're destined to be a person above others from birth. When that time comes, what will he do?" Su Qingjun grits her teeth and says, "I've also thought about this. He's not someone who has nothing to do with me." Masato Kihara's eyebrows twitches and says, "Oh, then I'm curious, he's not related to you in any way, and he's just an ordinary part-time disciple. What relationship does he have with you?" Su Qingjun takes a deep breath, and then says in a loud voice, "Lu Qin is a disciple that I've just accepted." What? Masato Kihara is instantly stunned. "Oh, congratulations, master, you've now risen a generation and become a grandmaster." Chapter 173. For a famous cultivation sect like the Kunlun party, its inheritance for thousands of years was naturally passed down through the method of passing down from master to disciple. Starting from the two founders, Kuan Yuanzi and Tai Luo, the torch was passed down endlessly until today. Therefore, taking in disciples was actually a very normal thing in the Kunlun party. Generally speaking, most cultivators would take in disciples. It was not that there were no cultivators who did not take in disciples, but it was very rare. As for the reason, it was actually very simple. This was just like the inheritance of a family in the human world. The foundation that one had painstakingly laid down all their lives would always be hoped that someone could inherit it. The achievements one had made in the path of cultivation would always be hoped that someone could carry forward it. And at the moment of one's death, most people would always hope that there would be someone by their bedside to take care of them in old age. This was the innate nature of countless people in the vast land of the divine central continent. Whether one was a cultivator or not, or an ordinary person, it was very difficult to jump out of this concern. However, it was also because of this that taking in disciples, especially in a famous and large sect like the Kunlun party, carried another layer of caution. This was because the inheritance of one's path of cultivation was not only related to one's life, it was also related to the growth and decline of the sect's strength. If a mere odd-job disciple jumped out and announced to the world that he would take in one disciple today and another tomorrow, what was the use of teaching the old and young of the sect being trash? Of course, the Kunlun party would not allow this to happen. In fact, in order to allow most of the young disciples to better and more focused on cultivation, the unconventional rule in the Kunlun party was that other than odd-job disciples, disciples in the Qi refinement realm and most disciples in the foundation establishment realm were not qualified to take in disciples either. Normally speaking, for the vast majority of cultivators in this world, Jindan Friar was the peak that they would never be able to reach in their entire lives. And in the past, the cultivators who were able to cultivate to Jindan realm, no matter if it was in terms of cultivation, strength, experience, or talent, they were often outstanding. Therefore, Jindan's acceptance of disciples was a boundary drawn by the Kunlun party. Of course, there were still some areas that were unclear because many cultivators were stuck at the foundation realm for their entire lives. When they grew older and reached the peak of the foundation realm, the Kunlun party would give them a way out and allow them to accept some disciples. In short, in the Kunlun party, Jindan Friar had the qualifications to accept disciples. And Su Qingjun was precisely the youngest Jin Dan friar in the past few thousand years of the Kunlun party, this ancient sect. It was just that her talent was really too high and her current age was really too young. So much so that when the vast majority of people, including her master, Masato Kihara, were exclaiming in joy and admiration for her cultivation, they subconsciously forgot that Su Qingjun already had this kind of unconventional qualification to take in disciples. You accept disciples? Masato Kihara looked to be in a daze as if he had yet to wake up from his disciple's words. Su Qingjun very calmly nodded her head and said, Yes, master, I think I have this qualification right? Masato Kihara thought for a moment and suddenly realized that his disciple was really right. This discovery made his old face turn black. He paced back and forth a few steps in front of Su Qingjun and murmured, But this is too that. He suddenly raised his head, frowned and looked at Su Qingjun, said, You yourself are only 22 years old, do you know? Su Qingjun said, I know. Then why do you still accept disciples? Su Qingjun sternly said, Among the ancestors of our Kunlun party, which one of them has ever issued a decree saying that the 22 years old Jin Dan friar is not allowed to accept disciples? I really don't think so. Masato Kihara touched his head in distress and said, But there wasn't a genius like you in the past. Su Qingjun snorted and said, Master, you can't have the meaning of blaming me because of my talent. I won't. Masato Kihara hurriedly denied, but then he frowned in distress and said, But this doesn't feel too good, June girl. This matter certainly seemed a bit strange. Generally speaking, most of the young people at Su Qingjun's age were still in the qi refining realm, or at most the foundation building realm. Even if there were some young geniuses like her in the whole world, they were often so young that they were completely focused on their cultivation. In their eyes, there was only the higher Yuanying realm and the legendary deity transformation realm. Who would be distracted to accept disciples? Even if they wanted to accept disciples, shouldn't they wait until they were 50 or 60 years old, when most of their potential was exhausted and the upper limit of their future was already in sight? Masato Kihara naturally raised his doubts, hoping to pull this obedient female disciple of his back from the crooked path. Who knew that on this day Su Qingjun was exceptionally stubborn. She said she wanted to accept disciples and she would accept disciples, refusing to give in at all. Just as the two of them were arguing, and Masato Kihara was beginning to get angry from embarrassment, they heard a sudden loud noise from behind the mountain peak in the distance. Then several beams of light shot up into the sky, illuminating the heaven and earth. Not long after, they swayed and danced, turning into the image of a dragon and a tiger. They were so dazzling that people couldn't look at them directly. Masato Kihara's expression suddenly changed slightly. She looked at the strange light in the sky for a moment, then said to Su Qingjun, We'll talk about this later. Then she leaped up and flew toward the place where the strange light was shooting up into the sky. Su Qingjun was also shocked by the strange light. Although the flying goose platform was very far away, she could still feel the waves of abundant and unstoppable spiritual power of heaven and earth, like an invisible whirlpool crazily surging toward the place where the light was rising. This was the scene that all cultivators in the world yearned for even in their dreams. Someone had broken through the great life and death juncture. Breaking through the great illusion, seeing the great joy, obtaining supreme magic power, understanding the mysteries of the world, seeing through the true meaning of Taoism, ascending to the sky in one step, and becoming a superior person. It was becoming a perfected being. This day was full of ups and downs. It seemed that one thing followed another, and each one was bigger and more important than the last. It was simply too much for the eyes to take in. At first, in Kunwa City, the people of the Su family kidnapped people in the downtown area, attracting onlookers. Then the scene suddenly changed. The genius girl of the Su family, Jin Dan, came and caused a disturbance in the Su family, causing a sensation in the whole city. Then what happened next made the things that happened in Kunwa City instantly dim. After 11 years, the light of proving true appeared on the mountain of Kunlun again. The 5,000-year-old Kunlun finally had a great perfected being in the Yuanying realm. Apart from the extremely small number of deity transformation stage perfected beings who were endowed with extraordinary talent and great luck, perfected beings of the Yuanying realm were almost the pinnacle of human cultivators' achievements on the path of cultivation. When one reached the level of the Yuanying realm, one's talent was no longer completely determined by one's innate talent. Opportunities, luck, external forces, and various spiritual materials and resources were almost inexhaustible. Only then could there be hope to create an incomparably powerful perfected being of the Yuanying realm. The great life and death juncture, which made people's expressions change at the mention of its name, was like a thunderclap reverberating in the ears of the cultivation world. It was also the most famous abyss. Many geniuses failed in this place and fell into the yellow spring when they were only one step away from the peak of their life. The significance of a perfected being of the Yuanying realm could never be overestimated. This was also the case for a famous sect like the Kunlun party. Although among the 5 great sects of Zhengxiameng deity transformation stage perfected beings were the face, the wind, and the strong guarantee, under normal circumstances, unless it was a matter of life and death for the sect, deity transformation stage perfected beings absolutely wouldn't make a move. Naturally, there were all kinds of connections, restraints, and restrictions. However, perfected beings of the Yuanying realm were the foundation of a great sect. This couldn't be wrong. When the light of confirming reality soared into the sky, not only did the entire Kunlun mountain instantly stir, even the big and small places outside of Kunlun mountain held their breaths. The people in Kunwa city also instantly forgot about the previous liveliness. Each and every one of them gazed at the strange light in the depths of the mountain, which was connected to the sky. The head of the Kunlun party, Idle Month, quickly rushed over from Tiankuan Peak. Before he arrived, there were already 7 or 8 perfected beings standing in the air, looking down at the Threezhang Tall mountain below. Yes, the light of confirming reality was emitted from that immortal's cave. It was Exian's master, Dongfang Tao. After perfected person Idle Month, other perfected beings of the Kunlun party, Yuanying perfected beings, rushed over one after another. The friendship of fellow disciples was one thing, but those who achieved the perfected being realm knew more about the hardships and dangers than ordinary people. It was indeed worthy of great joy and celebration. In addition, there was another meaning that could only be understood. The moment one became a perfected being, the light of confirming reality would soar into the sky and produce all kinds of special illusions, which could somewhat reflect the accomplishments of the perfected being's cultivation technique and the level of his cultivation. Although it couldn't be too accurate, this light of confirming reality couldn't deceive people. At the very least, it would give people an idea. Before long, in the sky outside the Threezhang Tall mountain, many silhouettes appeared near and far. They silently and concernedly looked at the immortal's cave and the light of confirming reality. At the foot of the mountain, there were also many people rushing over one after another. Exen stood at the very front, just outside Dongfang Tao's immortal's cave. Her eyes were full of surprise and expectation. She looked at the strange scene over there without blinking. Beside her, Melaleuca japonica had a face full of emotion. Her expression was somewhat complicated as she looked at the immortal's cave. Other than them, there were also many people from the Kunlun party who were attracted over. Of course, among them there couldn't be people with low cultivation. For example, the odd-job disciples wouldn't join in the fun. Those people with innate talents didn't even have the qualifications to see the light of confirming reality. It was better for them to honestly go back to work. Somewhere in the sky above the Threezhang Tall mountain, the head of the Heavenly Soldier Hall, Dukan Jinren, stood on the clouds with an indifferent expression. Beside him, He's expression was calm, but his expression was slightly complicated as he looked at the strange light that could pierce through the sky and the earth. After a moment, Dukan Jinren's voice came from the front. He said, "If you must go and ask him, be careful. Old man Dongfang's temper isn't good." Yes, disciple understands. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.